Hey guys, tonight we're going somewhere I guarantee you've never wanted to go. Not back to the Middle Ages, not into some dusty castle, but straight into one of the darkest corners of the 20th century. A place where science didn't mean progress, it meant pain. Where men in white coats weren't healers, they were executioners with clipboards. We're talking about the nightmare experiments of Nazi scientists during World War II. Spoiler alert, you wouldn't last a day. Before we dive in, take a second to like the video and subscribe if you actually enjoy this strange mix of history and horror I bring you. Drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you. Because somehow it's always fascinating to see who's trying to relax with stories like these at 2 in the morning. Now get comfortable, maybe dim the lights, maybe let a fan hum in the background, and let's step carefully into tonight's journey. You've heard of history classes that put you to sleep, but tonight you're not in a classroom. Tonight you're stepping into something much darker. Forget the clean, orderly textbooks, the grainy black and white photos, the comfortable distance of time. You're not safe behind glass museum cases or YouTube documentaries. You've just woken up in the middle of one of the most nightmarish chapters of human history. And no, it's not a medieval hay mattress or a plague pit. This time you've found yourself in a barbed wire world of uniforms, boots, barking dogs, and laboratories that would make even the most depraved horror writer take a step back. Welcome to Nazi Germany during World War II. Bedtime, where the word science doesn't mean innovation, progress, or discovery. It means you've become a disposable body in a grotesque game of experiments disguised as research. Take a deep breath. Well, maybe don't. The air smells like coal smoke, disinfectant, and fear. The ground is frozen under your bare feet because shoes aren't guaranteed here. You've been given a striped uniform that fits like it was designed by someone who hates fabric, and maybe a thin cap that does absolutely nothing against the chill biting into your skull. Around you, towers loom with armed guards staring down at you, rifles in hand. Searchlights sweep across the yard, the kind of light you might expect at a prison escape movie, except here you're not even trying to run. Where would you go? Beyond the fence is another fence, and beyond that, miles of hostile countryside. And behind you, a blockhouse with smoke rising from a chimney you try not to think about too much. You've already heard the whispers, the rumours that make your stomach twist. You shuffle forward with the others, a line of hollow faces, sunken cheeks, and eyes that don't bother pretending to hope anymore. You're herded like livestock toward the building the guards casually call the infirmary. Don't let the name fool you. It isn't a place of healing. The Red Cross sign painted sloppily on the wall is a cruel joke, a twisted piece of theatre designed to lull the outside world into thinking medical care is happening here. Inside, there are men in white coats, doctors with degrees from respected universities, men who once swore an oath to do no harm. But here, harm isn't an accident. It's the job description. These men aren't treating diseases. They're creating them. They're not easing pain. They're inflicting it. And they don't see you as a patient. You're a number, a subject, a test case. The fluorescent lights hum above you. The walls are bare, sterile, but not clean. The smell of antiseptic only barely covers the metallic tang of blood that seems to cling to the floor no matter how many times it's scrubbed. On a tray nearby, surgical instruments gleam with a polished shine. But that shine isn't for your benefit, it's for theirs. to make them feel like what they're doing still has a veneer of science, to make them believe this is a laboratory instead of a torture chamber. One of the doctors walks by, clipboard in hand, glasses perched neatly on his nose, a face that might look ordinary if you passed him on a street in Berlin or Munich. He might even smile, a polite curl of the lips, as if he's greeting you for a checkup at a normal clinic. Except his notes aren't about curing a cough or prescribing aspirin. They're about how long it will take for your body to collapse under extreme conditions. He's not wondering whether you'll get better. He's wondering how much useful data he can squeeze out of you before you die. You're ushered into a room where beds line the walls, thin mattresses with no sheets, straps hanging off the sides. The straps are not a mystery. They're for you. You notice the people already lying there, their faces pale, their eyes darting nervously, some whispering prayers, others staring blankly at the ceiling as if they have already left their bodies behind. The guards bark orders in German, but you don't need to speak the language to understand. You sit, you wait, you become part of the machine. And here's where the nightmare truly begins. Because everything you've learned about modern medicine, about hospitals being safe places, about doctors being healers, about treatments being designed to help, gets turned upside down. Here, the experiments are designed to push the human body to breaking point, to explore the limits of suffering under the guise of military necessity. Can soldiers survive in freezing water? Can pilots endure high altitudes? Can the human body be sterilized quickly and efficiently? Every grotesque question has a human answer, and you are the answer sheet. The doctor at the head of the room clears his throat, his words calm, clinical. He explains nothing to you, of course. You don't need to understand, you just need to comply. But if you could read the papers on his desk, you'd see the language of science twisted into something unrecognizable. Phrases like hypothermia resistance, malaria inoculation, twin comparisons, written in neat handwriting that hides the reality behind them. What those words really mean is cold water, fever, injections, amputations, infections, suffering. Outside the window, the world is still at war. Bombers drone overhead, somewhere in the distance. Soldiers march through ruined cities. Millions fight and die in battlefields across Europe. But inside this room, another war is being waged. A war against the basic dignity of human life, fought not with guns and tanks, but with scalpels and syringes. And unlike the soldiers outside, you don't even get the illusion of fighting back. You catch sight of another figure entering the room, this one more sharply dressed. Not the white coat of a doctor, but the black uniform of an SS officer. His presence is commanding, his posture rigid, his face a mask of authority. He's not here to heal or to experiment. He's here to ensure obedience, to make sure the doctors get their data without interruptions, to make sure you don't resist, don't cry too loudly, don't break the rhythm of the experiment. His hand rests casually on the pistol at his belt, a silent reminder that the line between laboratory subject and corpse is thinner than the paper on that clipboard. You shift uncomfortably, your stomach knotting, the reality sinking in. This isn't a bad dream you'll wake up from. This isn't a horror film with credits that will roll. This is your reality now. And the only thing you know for sure is that you won't be leaving this room the same way you came in. The humming lights, the scratch of the pen, the soft clink of metal instruments being laid out. These sounds replace the comforts of ordinary life. No alarm clocks, no radio music, no kettle boiling. just the sterile background of cruelty disguised as curiosity. And what makes it worse is the banality of it all. These men don't think they're monsters. They think they're researchers. They'll go home at the end of the day, eat dinner, kiss their families, maybe even read a bedtime story to their children. Then tomorrow they'll come back and freeze a human being alive to measure survival times in ice water. And if you think this is as bad as it gets, if you think maybe this is just one grotesque corner of the war, brace yourself. Because the so-called experiments aren't just about freezing or burning or starving. They stretch into every part of human existence. From the most intimate parts of your body to the very structure of your bones. From the diseases pumped into your veins to the poisons slipped into your meals. From the twins separated and dissected to the skeletons collected for macabre museums. There's no part of humanity that isn't poked, prodded, measured and mutilated under the cold gaze of Nazi science. You glance around the room again, realizing the quiet truth that seeps into your bones. No one expects to walk out of here stronger. No one expects recovery. The only thing left is endurance. Endure long enough for them to write something in their notes. Endure long enough to become a line in their data. Endure long enough for your body to give them whatever answer they're looking for. Because when it finally gives out, when you finally collapse under the weight of their cruelty, they'll just move on to the next body in line. And so begins your journey through this world of nightmare experiments. A world where science isn't a beacon of progress, but a weapon sharpened against the most vulnerable. Where the human body is stripped down to numbers and samples. Where morality has been surgically removed from medicine. You thought the Middle Ages were brutal. At least the peasants there didn't have to face men in white coats with clipboards and scalpels, calling their agony data collection. This is the 20th century at its darkest, and you're right in the middle of it. You open your eyes, and the first thing you notice is the cold. It's not a comfortable chill like stepping into an air-conditioned room. It's the kind of cold that crawls into your bones and sets up camp there. You're lying on a wooden plank that someone had the audacity to call a bed, covered by a thin blanket that smells like it's seen more winters than you have. Around you, rows of bunks stretch in both directions, stacked 3 high, filled with bodies that are more bones than flesh. Some of them are still, some shifting restlessly, some coughing weakly in the dark. Congratulations, this is your new home, a barracks in a Nazi concentration camp. Forget the comforts, you know. There are no soft mattresses, no pillows, no private rooms. Just overcrowded bunks, straw ticking that hasn't been changed since it was dumped here, and a stench that makes medieval huts smell like luxury apartments. The air is a cocktail of human sweat, unwashed bodies, damp wood, and something sour you can't quite place. You'll figure it out later when you realise the latrine is overflowing again. A bell clangs somewhere outside, sharp and metallic, the kind of sound that doesn't just wake you up, but jolts you like an electric shock. This isn't a gentle alarm clock or the cheerful chirp of a phone. This is the sound that says, "Get up now, or you'll regret it." Around you, the others start to stir. Nobody complains, nobody lingers. Everyone moves with the same grim understanding. You don't want to be the one still lying down when the guards walk in. You swing your legs over the side of the bunk and immediately regret it. The floor is concrete and it's ice cold against your bare feet. No slippers here, no socks unless you were lucky enough to scavenge a pair. And even then they're probably full of holes. You stand, your body stiff and aching, and look around. There's no privacy, no space to stretch, just rows of bunks crammed so tightly you can barely walk without brushing against someone else. This isn't a bedroom, it's a warehouse for human beings who've been reduced to numbers. You shuffle toward the door with the others, because that's what you do here. You shuffle. There's no energy left for walking quickly, no strength for standing tall. Everyone moves like shadows. Quiet, bent, automatic. Outside, the yard waits, wide and bleak, surrounded by tall fences, topped with barbed wire that glints in the pale light of dawn. Towers stand at each corner, guards inside them, rifles pointed lazily down, as if shooting you would be as casual as swatting a fly. You don't need to be told the rules. The rules are obvious. Stay in line, keep your eyes down, don't draw attention. The cold bites at your skin, sharper than before. Your uniform is nothing more than a thin, striped coat and pants, hanging loose because you've already lost weight since arriving here. Everyone does. There's no such thing as holding steady. You shrink, you wither, you hollow out. The uniform is meant to dehumanize you, to strip away individuality, to make you blend into the sea of identical figures trudging through the yard. No names here, just numbers stitched clumsily onto cloth. A code that replaces your entire identity. You glance up at the buildings surrounding the yard. Long, low barracks like the one you slept in, their roofs sagging under the weight of frost, windows covered in grime. A few larger structures, brick, with chimneys puffing smoke that you don't want to think about too hard. Somewhere, a guard barks an order in German. The words may be foreign, but the meaning is clear enough. Line up, faster, no hesitation. Dogs bark, straining at their leashes, teeth bared. The sound is sharp, jarring, and every prisoner flinches instinctively. Roll call begins. Hours of standing in the freezing yard, motionless, while guards pace back and forth, counting, recounting, shouting at anyone who shifts or stumbles. The weak sometimes collapse, and when they do, it isn't compassion that greets them. A kick, a shout, sometimes worse. You don't dare look too long. You just keep your eyes fixed straight ahead, your body trembling from the cold, your mind drifting somewhere else, anywhere else, because thinking too hard about where you are will break you before the day even begins. When it's finally over, you're herded toward a long building that serves as the kitchen. Don't let the word fool you. There's no smell of frying bacon, no fresh bread, no coffee brewing. What waits for you is a thin, grey liquid called soups if the guards are feeling generous, or just dirty water with floating cabbage scraps if they're not. Maybe a chunk of stale bread, so hard you could use it as a weapon if you had the strength. This isn't breakfast, it's fuel. Barely enough to keep your body from collapsing before the day's work. You sip it carefully, because spilling means losing what little you have. You chew the bread slowly, even though it tastes like mould and dust, because there's no guarantee you'll get anything better later. This is the rhythm of life in the camp. Wake up in filth, stand in the cold, choke down a few bites of something barely edible, and then head to work. But don't think of work as a paycheck, or even as something meaningful. Work here means breaking rocks until your hands bleed, carrying heavy loads until your back gives out, digging trenches that serve no purpose except to exhaust you. The labour isn't designed to build anything. It's designed to destroy you slowly, piece by piece, until there's nothing left. And just when you think you understand the misery of daily life here, the reality sinks in deeper. Because this camp isn't just about imprisonment and forced labour. It's also a laboratory, a testing ground, a place where the word experiment doesn't mean curiosity and discovery. It means you're about to be subjected to procedures that sound like they were dreamed up by someone who hated the very concept of humanity. The barracks aren't just dormitories, they're storage. The yard isn't just a place for roll call, it's a sorting ground. And the infirmary, the building with the red cross on it, isn't a hospital. It's where the real nightmares wait. As you shuffle back from the so-called kitchen, bowl in hand, you can't help but notice the way some prisoners are pulled aside by guards. Not for punishment, not for extra work, but for something worse. They're escorted toward the medical building, their faces pale, their bodies thin, their eyes darting nervously. Nobody says it out loud, but everyone knows what that means. Once you go through those doors, you rarely come back the same, if you come back at all. The barracks become your only refuge. The calling it a refuge is laughable. It's overcrowded, it stinks, it's crawling with lice, and it's colder inside than out. But it's the one place where you can lie down, close your eyes, and pretend for a few moments that you're somewhere else. Maybe you imagine your old bed, your family's kitchen, the sound of laughter. Or maybe you don't imagine anything at all because memories hurt too much now. Night comes quickly, though you can't tell if it's night or just the heavy clouds blocking the sky. There's no clock, no schedule you control, only the orders barked at you. You collapse onto your bunk, surrounded by coughing, muttering, restless bodies. The blanket is thin, the straw pokes through the mattress. Your stomach growls from hunger, and sleep comes only because exhaustion drags you under. And yet, even here, in this world of cold, hunger, and fear, you catch glimpses of something strange. A whispered joke between two bunkmates, a scrap of bread quietly shared, a hand pressed reassuringly against your shoulder when you can't stop shivering. The human spirit doesn't disappear completely, even in a place designed to crush it. But it's fragile, flickering like a candle in the wind, always at risk of being snuffed out by the next order, the next blow, the next experiment. So this is your new home, a barracks of rot and despair, a yard of endless roll calls, a kitchen that serves hunger instead of food, and a medical building that promises horrors under the disguise of treatment. You've only just woken up here, and already you understand the truth. This isn't life. It's survival, one agonizing day at a time, in a place where science has been twisted into a weapon, and humanity is just another experiment waiting to happen. You've made it through another roll call, another bowl of watery soup, another endless shift of labour that leaves your back screaming and your stomach hollow. But if you thought the worst thing in this camp was swinging a pickaxe until your hands blister, you haven't met the real authorities yet, because the men who hold the most power here don't carry rifles. They carry stethoscopes, clipboards, and scalpels. At least, that's what they look like. In reality, they carry nothing but cold detachment wrapped in white coats. These are the doctors in uniform, and they're about to redefine everything you thought you knew about medicine. When you picture a doctor, maybe you think of the family physician who pats you on the back, checks your temperature, and reassures you with a gentle, "You'll be fine." Here, that image dies the moment you step inside the so-called infirmary. These men don't look at you like a person. They look at you the way a mechanic looks at a broken car part, except with less concern for whether you'll keep working after the repair. Their uniforms might be pressed, their boots polished, their hair slicked back, but beneath that surface they're not healers. They're bureaucrats of suffering, administrators of pain. You're lined up with the others in a narrow corridor that smells like antiseptic and iron. The white walls don't shine with cleanliness. They shine with the cold indifference of a place designed to look clinical, while hiding the fact that it's nothing more than a disguised chamber of horrors. A man in a lab coat walks past, his boots clicking on the tile, a cigarette dangling from his lips. He glances at you, scribbles something on a clipboard, and moves on without a word. To him, you're not a man or a woman. You're subject 47, or 82, or 109. The body standing in front of him is just another line on his chart. The names of these doctors are whispered among the prisoners. Mengele, Rascher, Schilling, Hirt. To the outside world, some of them were respected scientists with university chairs and published papers. Inside these fences, they're predators hiding behind the mask of research. Josef Mengele, the angel of death, whose calm smile hides an obsession with twins that borders on madness. Sigmund Rascher, who straps prisoners into ice water and calls it aviation medicine. Karl Klauberg, who devotes his life to figuring out how to sterilize women on an assembly line. These aren't fringe characters operating in secrecy. These are men with ranks, medals, and funding, encouraged by the Nazi state to push the boundaries of human cruelty in the name of progress. When they enter a room, even the guards straighten up. The SS officers might have guns, but the doctors have authority. They can point at you, nod, and in that moment your fate changes. A guard might kick you. A doctor might decide to dissect you. The guards enforce discipline, but the doctors decide how your body will be used, and there's no appeal, no chance of mercy. The clipboard is more dangerous than the rifle, because a bullet at least is quick. A clipboard means you'll be kept alive just long enough to serve someone else's experiment. You finally make it inside the examination room, and the lights are blinding compared to the dim barracks. A doctor in a spotless coat stands waiting, his hands clasped behind his back. He doesn't bother to greet you, doesn't even look you in the eye. Instead, he gestures for you to strip. The command isn't spoken, but you know what he wants. The room is cold, and your body shakes, but modesty doesn't exist here. You're a body, not a person. Your clothes fall into a pile, and the doctor walks slowly around you, inspecting like a farmer at a livestock auction. He picks up a caliper and measures the width of your skull. He notes the length of your arms, the span of your chest. He mutters to an assistant who scribbles furiously in a notebook. They aren't diagnosing you with anything. They're categorizing you, classifying you, fitting you into their twisted theories of race and biology. A cough escapes your throat, and the doctor's eyes flicker with interest. He makes a note. You've just volunteered for a respiratory study without knowing it. Another doctor enters, this one younger, eager, with the kind of energy that belongs in a first-year medical resident. Except instead of learning how to save lives, he's here to learn how to take them apart scientifically. He approaches you with a stethoscope, presses it to your chest, nods thoughtfully, then jots something down. He looks satisfied, as though he's just discovered a new clue in a puzzle. But the puzzle is you, and the solution always ends the same way, in suffering. The prisoners whisper stories at night, lying in the bunks when they can't sleep. One tells of being locked in a freezing tank while doctors watched through glass, stopwatch in hand, waiting to see how long it would take before his heart stopped. Another whispers about injections, typhus, malaria, tuberculosis, diseases deliberately introduced into healthy bodies just to observe their decline. Someone else swears they saw a pair of twins taken into a room, smiling because Mengele always promised candy, only for one to return days later, mutilated and silent. The doctors don't just treat the sick, they make the sick. They create illness where none existed, all to record the progress of decay. And the chilling part is how calm they are about it. No raised voices, no manic laughter, no obvious sadism, just cool professionalism. A doctor notes your pulse, your temperature, your breathing rate. He files the data, checks a box, and then decides whether to inject you with seawater, expose you to poison gas, or amputate a limb to test a new treatment. To him, it's not cruelty, it's procedure. The same way a modern researcher might adjust a microscope, he adjusts you. Occasionally you hear their conversations. The words float above you like a foreign language, but the tone is unmistakable. They argue about methods, about results, about which approach will provide more accurate numbers. They don't argue about whether it's right. That question never enters the room. In their world, right and wrong don't exist anymore. There's only useful and useless, productive and disposable. And you know which category you're in. Outside these walls, somewhere far from the camp, there are real hospitals. Children are being born, people are getting appendectomies, patients are receiving penicillin. Medicine is moving forward, helping people live longer, healthier lives. But inside this place, medicine has been hijacked. The doctors here aren't advancing humanity, they're degrading it. They're proving not what humans can survive, but how low humans can sink when ideology replaces morality. You sit on the examination table, cold metal against your skin, while the doctor flips through his notes. He doesn't look at you. He doesn't need to. He's already decided what happens next. Maybe you'll be part of a high-altitude test, strapped into a pressure chamber while the air is sucked out until you convulse. Maybe you'll be selected for sterilization, your reproductive system targeted by chemicals or radiation. Maybe you'll be chosen for disease trials, injected with pathogens to see how long it takes before you can't stand anymore. Whatever it is, it won't be treatment. It will be procedure, and you'll be reduced to another line in his report. The clipboard closes with a snap. A guard appears at the door. The doctor nods. You're escorted out, back into the corridor. Back into the world where survival is measured not in years but in hours and days. Behind you, the doctor lights another cigarette, already moving on to the next subject, already flipping open another folder. For him, the day continues seamlessly. For you, it's just the beginning of the nightmare. And as you shuffle back toward the yard, you realise something even more chilling than the experiments themselves. These men will one day claim they were just doing their jobs, that they were scientists seeking truth, that they were following orders. They'll hide behind the lab coat the way others hide behind a uniform. But you know the truth now. You've seen it up close. The white coat doesn't make them doctors. The uniform doesn't make them soldiers. They're something else entirely. People who traded humanity for procedure and called it science. You've been through the barracks, the roll calls, the soup that tastes like wet cardboard, and you've stood in front of the doctors with their clipboards and their cold stares. You think you've seen the worst of this place? But then comes the moment when your name, or rather, your number, is called. A guard points, a doctor nods, and suddenly you're being led away from the yard. Not toward the labour site, not toward the barracks, but toward a low building with frosted windows and a smell of damp stone. You're not going to work today. You're going to an experiment. And the subject is cold. Very, very cold. The Nazis called it aviation medicine. Sounds technical, sounds official, like something that would appear in a military manual with neat diagrams and charts. The reality is far less polished. What they really wanted to know was simple. How long can a human body survive in freezing water before it gives up? Their pilots were being shot down over the North Sea, and the men in white coats wanted data. Not theories, not animal tests, human data. And that's where you come in. The guards march you into a chamber where a large metal tank dominates the centre of the room. It looks like something out of a factory, not a hospital. A ladder leans against the side, steam curling faintly from the surface of the water. You can see frost clinging to the edges, the kind of icy crust that forms on a window in January. You already know, without touching it, that the water inside is brutally cold, just above freezing, maybe even filled with chunks of ice. Around the tank stand several men in uniforms and lab coats, clipboards in hand, stopwatches ready. They're not nervous, they're not uncomfortable. To them, this is another day at work. One of them gestures, and the guards begin stripping you of your clothes. The air bites at your skin immediately, but that's nothing compared to what's about to happen. You stand there shivering, your body exposed, while the doctors murmur to each other in calm, detached voices. They're not discussing you like a person. They're discussing you like a test subject, an object, a variable in their study. One of them lights a cigarette and exhales slowly, as if he's about to watch a boring play. Then comes the order. The guards grab you and push you toward the ladder. The water below gleams darkly, rippling faintly, promising a misery you've never felt before. You hesitate. Who wouldn't? But hesitation isn't allowed here. A shove in the back, and suddenly you're plunging into the tank. The shock is immediate, violent, total. It's like every nerve in your body has been set on fire and frozen at the same time. Your chest seizes, your lungs forget how to breathe, and your heart slams against your ribs like it's trying to escape. The cold clamps around you, not just on your skin but inside your bones, flooding every corner of your body with pain. You gasp instinctively, but the air you drag in feels razor sharp, your throat closing as you choke on your own panic. Above you, the doctors click their stopwatches. One makes a note, another adjusts his glasses. The guards stand impassively, watching you thrash. To them, this isn't cruelty, it's data collection. Every shiver, every gasp, every desperate movement is a number to be recorded, a line on a chart that will later be discussed in a conference room miles away. Minutes crawl by. Your body tries to fight, muscles clenching violently, teeth chattering so hard you worry they'll break. You can't stop shaking, can't stop moving, as if motion itself might generate warmth. But the water is merciless, leaching heat from you faster than your body can replace it. The pain in your skin gives way to a deeper ache, your limbs growing heavy, your movement slowing. The doctors take notes again. Heart rate dropping, muscle spasms decreasing. They've studied hypothermia before in theory, in textbooks, but now they're watching it happen in real time. Watching as your body burns its last reserves of energy. as your will to survive collides with the limits of biology. You try to focus on anything else: the ceiling lights, the sound of dripping water, the faint hum of the ventilation system. But the cold won't let you escape. It's in your skull, your spine, your gut. There's no place to hide. One of the doctors leans forward, speaking calmly as he gives instructions to the guards. They haul you partially out of the water, your body limp and trembling, and place you on a stretcher beside the tank. You think maybe it's over, that maybe they're done with you. But you're wrong. Because now comes the second part of the experiment, rewarming. In the real world, a doctor would cover you in blankets, give you hot drinks, maybe use heated air to gently raise your temperature. Here, they're trying everything else. One method involves plunging you back into scalding water, a violent swing from freezing to burning that sends your nervous system into shock. Another involves forcing women prisoners, still alive, to lie against your frozen body in a grotesque parody of compassion, their warmth used as a tool, not a comfort. Sometimes they rub you with animal skins, pour boiling liquids over you, or leave you shivering until your own body gives up the fight. Each attempt is timed, measured, noted. Not to save you, but to determine which method works best. The room is filled with sounds, the click of stopwatches, the scratch of pens on paper, the occasional command barked in German. Your own sounds, gasping, whimpering, groaning, don't register. They're not part of the data. You're not a person here. You're a reaction, a statistic. The doctor's eyes are fixed on you, not with concern, but with curiosity. The kind of curiosity you might have for an ant under a magnifying glass. Time loses meaning. Every second stretches into an eternity, your body trapped between agony and numbness. The shaking slows. Your thoughts blur. It's not that you stop caring. It's that caring becomes impossible when your mind is half frozen, when even fear moves too slowly to catch up with you. Somewhere, you hear a doctor say something about survival time. He sounds almost pleased, as if you've performed well in his twisted experiment. And then, just as suddenly as it began, it's over. Or rather, you're over. Maybe your heart gives out, maybe your lungs seize, maybe your body simply decides it can't go on. If you're unlucky enough to still be alive, you're dragged out, your limp body discarded onto a cot, left to shiver or convulse while the doctors pack up their notes. If you die, they don't mourn, they don't pause, they don't even notice. They simply record the time of death, mark it down, and prepare the tank for the next subject. Because there's always a next subject. Always another body waiting in the barracks. Another prisoner whose number will be called tomorrow. The experiment doesn't end when you do. It continues relentlessly because the men in lab coats want more data, more numbers, more proof that they've done their job. They'll stand in courtrooms later and point to these charts, these results, claiming they were advancing science. They'll insist it was for the good of the military, for the good of the nation. But you know the truth. You felt it in every frozen nerve. This wasn't science. It was sadism dressed up in equations. And as you lie there, drifting in and out of consciousness, or maybe slipping fully into silence, you realize something terrifying. Out in the world, people still believe doctors are healers. They trust the white coat, the stethoscope, the calm voice. But here, in this room, those symbols mean nothing. The coat isn't clean. It's stained with suffering. The clipboard doesn't record progress. It records death. and the stethoscope pressed against your chest wasn't checking for health. It was waiting to hear when your heart finally stopped. So, when you wake up tomorrow, if you wake up tomorrow, you won't just remember the cold. You'll remember the faces watching you freeze, the pens scratching your death into history, the fact that your suffering was just another entry in a ledger of cruelty. You'll remember that in this place, even the most basic human instinct, the need to stay warm, was twisted into a weapon. And you'll know the worst part. This was only one experiment. There are dozens more waiting, each as grotesque as the last, each designed to push the human body past the point of endurance, each carried out by men who never once questioned whether they should. You made it through the freezing tanks, or maybe you didn't. Maybe you were hauled out half dead and dumped on a cot while someone scribbled "terminated" in neat handwriting. But let's say, for now, that you survived. That your body somehow clung to life through hours of water that could have iced over vodka. Congratulations, you've just won yourself a ticket to the next ride in this carnival of nightmares. This one isn't about water, it's about air. And the question the doctors want to answer is simple. How high can the human body go before it breaks? In another world, in another timeline, you'd hear about altitude tests in the context of brave pilots climbing into pressurized cockpits, engineers testing oxygen masks, scientists working in clean labs with dials and gauges. Here, it's the same science stripped of ethics, stripped of humanity, stripped of anything that looks remotely like progress. Here, it's a steel chamber in a concentration camp, and you're the lab rat. The guards march you down a corridor, the walls echoing with each step, until you arrive at a room that looks more like a factory floor than a clinic. In the centre stands a huge cylindrical chamber, thick steel walls, rivets glinting under the light. It could be a boiler, or maybe some kind of submarine tank, if you didn't already know better. This is the low pressure chamber, and it's about to take you on a flight without wings. Around the chamber stand the doctors and their assistants, white coats pressed, boots polished, clipboards in hand. You'd think you were about to watch a demonstration at a university, except the chalkboard is missing, and the student is you. A guard opens the heavy hatch with a screech of metal, and inside you see a bare interior, no seat cushions, no safety straps, no instruments for you to control. Just a chair bolted to the floor, and the knowledge that when the door closes, there's no way out. You step inside, or rather, you're shoved inside. The hatch slams shut with a clang that reverberates in your chest. The air already feels still, heavy, as if the chamber itself is holding its breath. You hear the hiss of valves, the whine of machinery starting up. Outside, the doctors lean close to glass portholes, peering in at you like zoo visitors. They're not asking if you're ready. They don't care if you're terrified. They just care about the numbers. The experiment begins with a slow change, barely noticeable at first. Your ears pop, your head feels a little light, as though you've suddenly driven up a steep mountain road, but then it intensifies. The pressure drops further, the oxygen thinning, your chest rising and falling faster as your lungs scramble for air that isn't there. You suck in huge breaths, but they feel empty, like drinking from a straw in an almost empty glass. You know something's wrong, but your body can't fix it. Your vision starts to blur at the edges. Colours fade. The room tilts and spins. A high-pitched ringing fills your ears, drowning out the distant hum of machinery. Your hands shake uncontrollably, fingers curling into claws as your muscles spasm. You try to stand, but your legs betray you, wobbling like wet paper. Outside the porthole, faces watch you, unblinking, noting every twitch, every gasp. A stopwatch clicks, a pen scratches. The chamber simulates altitudes of 40,000, 50,000, sometimes even 60,000 feet, higher than most planes of the era could fly. At those heights, without pressurization, the human body becomes a balloon, slowly deflating. Your blood oxygen plummets. Your brain begins to shut down. Some subjects lose consciousness within minutes, slumping forward as the doctors watch intently. Others convulse, their bodies jerking violently, foam bubbling at the lips as hypoxia tears through the nervous system. And the doctors, they don't flinch, they don't panic, they don't reach for the hatch to save you. They lean in, fascinated, like men watching a new engine sputter to life. They want to see exactly how long you last, how your body reacts, at what point the line between life and death becomes visible. Every heartbeat, every breath, every second of agony is a data point in their notebook. Sometimes they revive subjects, dragging them out of the chamber once unconsciousness hits, forcing oxygen back into their lungs, rubbing stimulants on their skin just to see if revival is possible. Other times they don't bother. They let the chamber run until the body inside stops moving, stops breathing, stops being anything more than a corpse. And then they open the hatch, pull you out, and carry you away like a broken mannequin. The chamber is cleaned, reset, prepared for the next flight. There are variations, of course. Some experiments involve simulating rapid decompression, the kind that happens if a plane takes damage mid-air. One moment the chamber is steady, the next the pressure plummets, and your body reacts like it's been thrown into space. Your chest feels like it's tearing open, your eyes bulge, your skin tingles as nitrogen bubbles form in your blood. In the outside world, pilots would be strapped into ejection seats, trained to respond, equipped with emergency oxygen. Here, you're strapped into nothing, trained for nothing, equipped with nothing. You're just left to flail while men with notebooks nod approvingly. The aftermath is never gentle. If you survive, you're left staggering, dizzy, your lungs burning, your brain fogged with confusion. The guards don't care. They shove you back toward the barracks, where you collapse onto your bunk, shaking uncontrollably. And the others glance at you, some with pity, some with blank resignation, because they know your fate could be theirs tomorrow. Nobody asks questions. Nobody dares. The walls here have ears, and compassion can get you noticed, and being noticed is the last thing you want. And if you don't survive, if your body shuts down in the chamber, your lips turning blue, your chest finally still, then you're not a person anymore. You're a specimen. Your corpse might be dissected, studied for signs of internal damage, your organs weighed and recorded. The doctors lean over your body as if you're a cadaver in a medical school, except you weren't supposed to be on this table. You didn't volunteer. You were conscripted by force into the most unwilling medical trial in history. What makes it worse, what makes your skin crawl, even if you weren't in the chamber, is how casually the doctors talk about it later. They write papers, they share findings, they present results to colleagues as if this were ordinary research. They talk about tolerance to hypoxia and thresholds of consciousness without ever mentioning the names of the people who died to give them those numbers. Because in their eyes, there were no names, only data. At night, back in the barracks, you hear whispers about the chamber. Someone describes the sound of the hatch slamming shut, the way the air seemed to vanish, the way their chest felt like it was caving in. Another prisoner swears they saw someone's veins bulge and rupture, tiny capillaries bursting under the strain of low pressure. The stories circulate, half rumour, half truth, all terrifying. Nobody needs to exaggerate. The reality is bad enough. And through it all, the doctors in uniform remain the same. Calm, professional, detached. They go home after their shift, maybe to a warm meal, maybe to read a book, maybe to kiss their children goodnight. Then they come back the next morning, light another cigarette, and order another subject into the chamber. For them, it's routine. For you, it's a death sentence masquerading as science. You thought freezing water was the worst way to be tested, but at least in the cold tank, you felt something. Here, in the chamber, you feel everything fade. The air, the strength in your limbs, even the will to fight. It's not drowning. It's suffocating slowly in a room filled with nothing, while strangers watch and take notes. And the only thing more chilling than the experiment itself is knowing that when they are finished with you, there's always someone else waiting in line. Another body ready to be strapped into the sky. Another soul reduced to a statistic. So maybe you weren't chosen for the freezing tank. Maybe you avoided the low pressure chamber this time. You might think that means you've been spared the worst. But in a place like this, there's no such thing as spared. There's only waiting for your number to be called. And today, your body isn't going to be tested with cold air or thin oxygen. Today, it's thirst. The Nazis had a problem. At least they called it a problem. Their pilots flying long missions over the Mediterranean risked being shot down or stranded at sea. Fresh water in those cases wasn't exactly on tap. So the question they wanted answered was, could men survive drinking seawater? And if so, for how long? Now, in a sane world, someone would test this in a lab using chemical analysis, calculate salt concentrations, compare with kidney function, maybe test small, safe doses on willing volunteers. But this isn't a sane world. This is a concentration camp, which means the study was carried out not with volunteers, but with prisoners. And the test wasn't safe. It was a slow-motion torture session dressed up as science. You're marched into a room with long benches and metal cups lined up neatly on a table. At first glance, it looks almost civilized, like maybe you're about to be given a proper drink for once. But the smell hits you before the truth does. That faint, briny tang of salt water, sharp and unpleasant. The kind of smell that clings to your clothes after a swim at the beach. Only this isn't a beach. This is a laboratory, and the salt water in those cups isn't diluted. It's straight from the sea, boiled and strained, maybe altered with a chemical to make it even less drinkable. The guards line you up, the doctor gives an order. You're handed a cup and told to drink. You hesitate. Every instinct in your body screams that this is wrong. You've been thirsty before, painfully so, but even then you knew salt water wouldn't help. It would make it worse. Still, refusing isn't an option here. A rifle butt to the ribs, a barked command, and you tip the cup to your lips. The taste is immediate and brutal. It's not just salty. It's overwhelming, like swallowing liquid sandpaper. Your tongue recoils, your throat burns, your stomach lurches in protest. You gag, sputter, but the guard's glare tells you to keep going. You choke it down, every swallow scraping like broken glass. The others beside you do the same. their faces twisted, some coughing, some retching, but nobody dares spit it out. The room echoes with the sound of forced gulps, of misery disguised as a medical trial. The first cup is bad, the second is worse, the third feels impossible. Your stomach cramps, twisting violently as the salt tears through your gut. Your lips dry instantly, cracking, peeling, as if the salt is sucking the last bit of moisture from your body. Your throat feels raw, parched, even though you're swallowing liquid. It's the cruel paradox. The more you drink, the thirstier you become. The doctors stand nearby, watching carefully. They note your pulse, your skin colour, your breathing. They write down how much you drank, how quickly you began to cramp, how long before you started hallucinating. Because hallucinations come quickly when your cells are literally drying out from the inside. You see flickers of light at the edge of your vision, hear sounds that aren't there. The man next to you starts muttering nonsense under his breath, eyes glazed, drool running from his mouth. A doctor steps forward, tilts his head, scribbles something down. Hours pass. Your body rebels in every way it can. Vomiting, diarrhea, spasms of pain that leave you curled up on the bench. Your kidneys scream in silence, overworked, failing under the load of salt they can't process. Every cell in your body is desperate for water, clawing for hydration, but all you're given is more seawater. Some prisoners beg for mercy, for just a sip of clean water. The guards laugh. One even raises a ladle of fresh water, lets it glisten in the light, then dumps it onto the floor where it soaks into the dirt. The cruelty isn't just in the deprivation. It's in the taunting, the reminder that relief is right there, always withheld. The thirst becomes something beyond physical. It's mental, crushing, all-consuming. Your lips split and bleed. Your tongue feels swollen, heavy, coated in salt. Every thought narrows down to one obsession. Water. Clean, cool water. The kind you used to take for granted. Turning a tap, filling a glass, not even thinking about it. Here, it's the most precious thing in the world, and it's the one thing you're denied. The experiment continues for days. Some subjects are given only seawater. Others are starved completely, denied both food and drink, just to see which breaks faster. A few are given chemical treatments. The Nazis experimented with a compound called Birka water, designed to desalinate seawater, except it didn't work. It made the water even more toxic, causing violent diarrhea and rapid collapse. The doctors knew it wasn't effective, but they tested it anyway, because in this place, failure didn't matter. Only suffering did. By the second or third day, you can barely move. Your body is skeletal, your skin cracked, your eyes sunken. The cramps never stop, twisting you into a knot of misery. You try to sleep, but thirst wakes you every few minutes, a gnawing agony that won't let go. Some prisoners start licking the walls, hoping for condensation. Others chew on scraps of wood, desperate for moisture. You catch yourself fantasizing about the most mundane things. A dripping faucet, a puddle after rain, even the dirty ditch water you once swore you'd never touch. Anything but this. And all the while the doctors watch, calm, detached, clinical. They lean in with stethoscopes, check your heartbeat, take blood samples. They argue over which method produces clearer results. They don't see you wasting away. They see numbers, charts, graphs. They see progress. Eventually your body reaches the breaking point. Some collapse into seizures, limbs jerking uncontrollably as dehydration scrambles the brain's signals. Others slip into delirium, mumbling, clawing at the air, seeing visions that aren't there. A few simply stop moving altogether, their bodies unable to fight any longer. The doctors mark the time of death, close the folder, and move on. The corpses are carried away, and the benches are wiped down for the next group. For those who survive, survival is a cruel word. You're not healed afterward. You're not rewarded. You're simply returned to the barracks, a husk of yourself. Every organ screaming, every nerve fried. You collapse onto your bunk, lips bleeding, throat raw, stomach twisted, your body begging for water that won't come. Maybe another prisoner takes pity and shares a scrap of bread soaked in rainwater. Maybe not. Either way, you know that tomorrow the guards will call someone else's number and the cycle will begin again. And the irony, the sickening irony, is that none of this produced anything useful. Modern science already knew seawater couldn't sustain life. Sailors throughout history had learned it the hard way, long before anyone thought to test it in a lab. The results of these experiments weren't groundbreaking. They were obvious. The only thing the doctors proved was how much pain the human body could endure before collapsing. But for them, that was enough. So now, when you sit in your barracks, your lips still cracked, your body still trembling from dehydration, you understand the cruel truth. Here, even the simplest human need, the need to drink, to quench thirst, has been twisted into a weapon. Water, the thing that should give life, has been turned into torture. And tomorrow, when the guards march another group into that room with the benches and the metal cups, you know exactly what they'll face. The taste of salt, the agony of thirst, and the knowledge that in this place, even a sip of water can kill you. So you've survived freezing tanks, thin air, and salt water that burned your insides raw. You've staggered back to the barracks again and again, thinner, weaker, but somehow still breathing. And just when you think maybe you've paid your dues to the nightmare, another order comes. A guard points, your number is shouted, and you know instantly that your body has been chosen for the next experiment. This one isn't about water, or air, or thirst. It's about chemical weapons. Welcome to mustard gas trials, where science means blistered skin and lungs that feel like they're on fire. The Nazis weren't new to poison gas. World War I had already been a laboratory for clouds of chlorine and mustard that rolled over trenches, leaving soldiers blind, choking, blistered. By the time the Second World War rolled around, chemical weapons were supposed to be banned by treaties, but nobody here seemed to care about rules. The doctors wanted to know, what does mustard gas really do to the body, down to the smallest detail? How long before the blisters form? How deep do they go? What happens if we try different treatments? And you, standing in a striped uniform, bare skin exposed, are their answer sheet. You're marched into a building that smells sharp and acrid, the sting of chemicals burning your nose before you even step inside. On tables, bottles and jars are neatly lined up, labels written in crisp German script. The doctors wear masks and gloves, protecting themselves from what they're about to unleash. You, of course, get nothing. No mask, no gloves, no protection. Just your skin and lungs, ready to become the testing surface. A doctor picks up a swab soaked in a yellowish liquid and approaches you calmly, like a painter about to touch a canvas. He dabs it onto your arm, just a small smear, then another on your leg, another across your chest. The liquid feels oily, sticky. Nothing dramatic at first. He nods, makes a note, and steps back. You're left standing awkwardly, waiting, while the sting slowly begins. At first it's mild, like a sunburn creeping up on you. Then it grows sharper, more insistent, until your skin feels like it's being eaten alive by fire ants. Red patches bloom, swelling rapidly, and within hours your skin bubbles into blisters the size of coins. They burst, weeping fluid, raw flesh exposed underneath. The pain is relentless, not sharp like a cut, but constant, throbbing, as if your body has turned into one giant open wound. The doctors watch with fascination. They lean in close to measure the blisters, note the spread, record the time. They don't offer pain relief. They don't even offer water. They just observe. Some of them prod the blisters with instruments, watching you flinch, recording your reaction. One presses firmly, just to see how much fluid spills out. He looks almost curious, like a schoolboy poking a frog in biology class. Only you're not a frog. You're a human being who just became an unwilling test tube. And mustard gas isn't just skin deep. The fumes creep into your lungs, clawing at your throat, making every breath feel like you're inhaling hot sand. You cough violently, your chest seizing, your eyes watering. Tears stream down your face, blinding you, not from sadness, but because your tear ducts have been chemically attacked. Your voice rasps, your throat raw, every word reduced to a croak. The doctors nod approvingly, noting the irritation, recording the timeline of your decline. Days pass like this. The blisters don't heal. They spread, merge, ooze, sticking to your clothes until every movement rips the skin anew. Infection sets in quickly, the raw wounds, seeping pus, the smell of rot clinging to you. Your body weakens, fever takes hold, chills shake you even as sweat drenches your thin uniform. Sleep becomes impossible, every turn of your body scraping against the raw wounds. You beg silently for relief, for a bandage, for anything, but none comes. The point isn't to help you. The point is to watch you unravel. Sometimes they try treatments. They smear ointments, sprinkle powders, inject experimental drugs. None of it helps. Most of it makes things worse. The ointments sting like acid. The powders dry your wounds until the cracks split wider. The injections leave you trembling, nauseous, vomiting onto the floor, while the doctors jot notes about side effects. You're not being healed. You're being used to test whether the next German soldier who stumbles into a mustard gas cloud might stand a chance at survival. Spoiler? He wouldn't. Other times, they expose you to the gas itself, not just swabs on the skin. They herd you into a sealed room, the door clanging shut behind you, and release the vapour. It's invisible, but you feel it instantly. Your eyes slam shut, burning, tears pouring down your face. Your lungs seize, every breath a ragged gasp, as if you're drowning on dry land. You claw at your throat instinctively, desperate for air, but the air itself is poison. You stumble, collapse, retch onto the floor, every muscle screaming. And outside the little glass window, the doctors watch intently, pens poised, noting the exact moment you collapse, the exact time it takes for you to lose consciousness. Sometimes they revive you, dragging you out, forcing air back into your lungs. Not because they want to save you, but because they want to see what happens next. Do the lungs recover? Do the blisters scar? Can the subject walk again? Other times they let you fall silent, mark the time of death, and move on. One less subject, one more data point. The whispers in the barracks are always the same afterward. Someone describes how their skin peeled off in sheets, how the blisters fused until they couldn't move their arm. Someone else coughs blood into a rag, their lungs shredded from the gas, barely able to speak. Another prisoner pulls back their sleeve to reveal scars like melted wax, the permanent marks of chemical burns. These stories circulate, half warning, half inevitability. Everyone knows that one day it might be their turn. And through it all, the doctors remain calm, professional, detached. They argue over methods, debate which ointment seems to delay infection, which injection prolongs survival. They don't question whether the experiments are necessary. They don't even question whether they're moral. In their minds, the suffering in front of them isn't cruelty. It's a controlled variable. They're not hurting people. They're gathering data. When you finally stumble back to the barracks, your body covered in blisters, your lungs shredded, your skin reeking of infection, you collapse onto your bunk with no strength left. The others glance at you and look away quickly, not because they don't care, but because staring too long at your burns is like staring into their own future. Everyone here is a mirror of what's coming for the rest. And the irony, as always, is that none of this was necessary. By the time these experiments were carried out, the world already knew what mustard gas did. Soldiers from the First World War had suffered its effects by the tens of thousands. Medical journals had already documented the blisters, the lung damage, the blindness. The Nazis weren't learning anything new. They were just repeating old horrors, this time on prisoners who couldn't fight back. So tonight, as you lie in that bunk, your skin raw, your chest heaving, you know exactly what science has become here. It isn't healing. It isn't progress. It's a factory of scars, a production line of suffering. And when the guards come tomorrow, when another number is called, someone else will take your place in the chamber. Someone else will feel their skin turn to fire. Someone else will learn the hard way that in this camp, even the air you breathe can be turned against you. You've been burned, frozen, suffocated, and starved. You've been used as a sponge for chemicals and a container for seawater. At this point, you might think the Nazis had run out of ways to use the human body for their twisted idea of science. But you'd be wrong, because in their obsession with building a perfect race, they weren't just focused on how to kill. They were focused on how to control life itself. And that's how you end up in the sterilization wing, where the experiment isn't about survival, but about making sure you can never reproduce. The Nazis had an entire program devoted to what they called racial hygiene. The idea was simple in theory, monstrous in practice. Eliminate undesirable groups by stopping them from having children. Jews, Romani, people with disabilities, political prisoners, they were all targeted. It wasn't enough to imprison you. It wasn't enough to work you to death. They wanted to erase your future, to make sure your bloodline ended with you. And they had doctors who were more than happy to test out methods on living subjects. You're marched into a different kind of room this time. Not the cold tank, not the pressure chamber, not the chemical lab. This one looks almost ordinary at first glance. White walls, medical equipment neatly arranged, a faint smell of disinfectant. But the calm is a disguise. On the tray you see instruments that don't belong in a hospital, at least not in the way you know hospitals. Long needles, harsh chemicals, radiation devices that hum faintly. These aren't tools for healing. They're tools for ending something fundamental inside you. If you're a man, the process might start with injections. A doctor fills a syringe with a milky chemical, then calmly inserts it into your groin, straight into the tissue of your testicles. The pain is immediate and searing, a sharp shock that spreads through your lower body like fire. You gasp, maybe cry out, but the doctor doesn't flinch. He makes a note on his clipboard, watches you squirm, then steps back to observe. Over the next days, your body swells, bruises, fever sets in, infection crawls through you. Sometimes the chemicals destroy tissue entirely. Sometimes they don't. Either way, you've been marked as biologically useless, even if you're still alive. If you're a woman, it's another kind of horror. Some are forced into surgery, their fallopian tubes tied, clamped or burned. Others are injected with caustic chemicals designed to scar the uterus, leaving them in agony for days, bleeding, writhing in pain. Still others are placed under X-ray machines, their lower bodies exposed to high doses of radiation. You lie there as the machine buzzes, your skin heating, your organs silently cooking inside. The doctors don't warn you about the burns, the cancer, the sickness that follows. They don't need to. They want it. You feel the effects quickly, the burning, the cramps, the waves of nausea that leave you weak and trembling. Some women lose consciousness on the table, only to be dragged back to the barracks afterward, bleeding through thin clothes, barely able to walk. Others develop infections that rage unchecked, fevers spiking, bodies consumed by pain. And the doctors, they take notes, they argue over dosage, they debate which method is most efficient. Efficiency is the word they use often. Not compassion, not treatment, not even medicine. Efficiency. As if sterilizing a human being was the same as streamlining a factory process. In the barracks, the stories spread in whispers. A man unable to walk for weeks after injections, his groin blackened and swollen. A woman who stopped menstruating suddenly, her body scarred inside from chemicals she couldn't even name. Another who developed sores and burns that never healed, the result of radiation aimed at her pelvis. Everyone knows someone who went into the sterilization wing and came back changed, hollow, broken. And everyone knows that if your number is called for that building, it isn't just your present at risk, it's your future. The cruelty of it isn't just physical, it's psychological. In a world already stripped of dignity, the ability to imagine a life beyond the fences is one of the last fragile comforts. Maybe you think, if you survive, you'll see your family again. Maybe you'll rebuild. Maybe you'll have children. But sterilization rips even that hope away. It tells you that even if you survive this camp, even if you live to see freedom, your body has been altered permanently. The future you dreamed of is gone. The doctors don't care. To them, reproduction isn't personal. It's numbers, charts, theories of genetics scribbled in thick German handwriting. They talk about bloodlines, about purity, about strengthening the nation. They look at your pain and see progress toward a racial utopia that exists only in their ideology. The fact that you're screaming on a table, clutching your stomach, begging for relief, it doesn't register. You're not a person, you're a case study. Sometimes they combine sterilization with other experiments, just to see what happens. Women who have already been weakened by starvation are injected with caustic substances to test resilience. Men who've been through freezing or pressure chambers are irradiated afterward, as if one nightmare wasn't enough. The layering of cruelty isn't accidental, it's deliberate. The doctors want to see how broken a body can become before it finally stops. And the worst part? It's not always immediate. Some subjects walk out of the experiment room on their own 2 feet, seemingly intact. They go back to work, back to their bunks, back to the endless grind of camp life. They think maybe they survived. But months later, the truth reveals itself. A woman tries to conceive after liberation, only to discover she can't. A man finds himself permanently infertile, his body scarred in ways he never understood at the time. The sterilization experiments weren't just torture in the moment. They were a delayed cruelty, a wound that followed survivors for the rest of their lives. Back in the barracks, you lie awake, the pain in your abdomen radiating through your body, your future slipping away with every cramp, every fevered shiver. Around you, others whisper about what was done to them. Voices hushed, ashamed, terrified. There's no comfort, no solidarity strong enough to undo the damage. Because here, even the most basic part of being human, the ability to create life, has been weaponized against you. And tomorrow the guards will line up another group, and the doctors will pull out their syringes, their scalpels, their radiation machines. They'll talk about efficiency. They'll scribble notes about dosages. They'll debate methods in calm, professional tones. And another set of prisoners will leave the building unable to imagine a future that includes children, family, continuation. Because in this camp, even your ability to reproduce isn't yours. It belongs to the men in uniforms, the ones who've decided they can play God with your body, with your life, with the generations that will never come after you. You've already learned that here, survival is nothing more than a delay. One day it's the cold tank. Another day it's a pressure chamber. Another, a syringe of poison or radiation. But then you notice something strange happening in the camp. Certain prisoners are separated, pulled aside during selections, not sent to labour or to immediate death. They're not treated better exactly, but they're marked for something different. And the reason isn't strength or skill or luck. It's that they came here in pairs. Identical faces, matching heights, siblings who look like mirror images. Twins. If you happen to be one of them, congratulations. Or condolences, depending on how you see it. You've just become the personal project of Josef Mengele, the man who strolls around Auschwitz with a polished smile, pristine boots, and the calm demeanour of someone who thinks he's a benevolent uncle. The prisoners whisper his name at night, the angel of death. And while most doctors here look at you like a number, Mengele looks at you like a toy, something to play with, to prod, to break apart, to compare, and to discard when the novelty wears off. From the moment he spots you in line, his eyes light up. He points, gestures, and suddenly you and your twin are ushered out of the crowd. The guards don't shove you roughly the way they do others. They don't need to. Mengele's selection carries a different kind of authority. You're marched away from the rest, your hand clutching your siblings, because in this place, that bond is the only anchor you have left. And now it's the very thing that has put you in danger. At first, it feels like you've been given a strange sort of reprieve. You're not sent to back-breaking labour in the fields. You're not dumped into the freezing tanks. Instead, you're housed in special barracks, cleaner than most, though still crawling with lice and reeking of damp wood. You're given slightly more food, enough to keep you alive, not enough to keep you healthy. Mengele visits often, walking between the bunks, smiling, speaking in a friendly tone. He pats children on the head, asks them questions, even brings them sweets sometimes. For a moment, you almost forget where you are. For a moment, you think maybe this man sees you as human. But then the experiments begin. You and your twin are led into the examination room. Mengele himself stands waiting, flanked by assistants with notebooks. He's perfectly groomed, his uniform spotless, his hair neat, as if presentation matters more than the reality of what he's about to do. He greets you warmly, as though you're a guest in his office. Then he tells you to undress. You obey, shivering, while he circles, eyes sharp, noting every similarity and difference between you and your sibling. Measurements come first. Height, weight, arm span, head circumference. Calipers pressed to your skull. Tape stretched across your shoulders. Every angle of your body compared to your twins, noted meticulously in a notebook. Then come the photographs. You stand side by side while a camera clicks, flashes blinding you, the doctor arranging you like dolls. Smile, don't smile. Turn your head, hold still. The photographs will be filed away in albums, grotesque trophies of his obsession. But measurements and photos are only the beginning. Soon, the real experiments start. Injections of unknown substances into one twin while the other is kept as a control. Maybe it's a disease culture. Typhus, tuberculosis, malaria. Maybe it's a chemical that burns under the skin. Maybe it's nothing at all, just saline to compare reactions. You watch your sibling's face twist in pain, their body convulse with fever, while your own remains untouched, for now. But you know it's only temporary. Mengele doesn't leave anything incomplete. Blood draws are constant. Vials upon vials taken from your veins until you feel lightheaded, weak, barely able to stand. Sometimes one twin is drained nearly dry while the other is left alone, just to see how their bodies react differently. Organs are prodded, fluid sampled, skin scraped. You're not being treated, you're being catalogued. And then come the surgeries. No anaesthesia, no real sterilisation, just scalpels slicing into flesh while assistants take notes. Bones are broken deliberately to compare healing. Muscles are cut and sewn back together. Sometimes limbs are amputated, one twin losing a leg or an arm while the other remains whole, so Mengele can watch the contrast. The pain is unimaginable, but to him, it's just an experiment. Sometimes he goes further. Injections into the eyes to see if he can change the colour, leaving children blinded or scarred. Attempts to fuse twins together, stitching their bodies like grotesque puppets, creating infections that rage unchecked. Autopsies performed not after death, but to create it. One twin killed so organs can be examined and compared with the survivors. The surviving twin rarely lasts long afterward. Once one is gone, the other has lost their value. And through it all, Mengele maintains the same demeanour. Calm, polite, even cheerful. He whistles as he works, cracks small jokes, chats with assistants as though nothing unusual is happening. He believes what he's doing is science, that his twin studies will unlock genetic secrets to help the Reich breed a perfect race. He doesn't see screaming children. He sees research subjects. He doesn't see families torn apart. He sees data points. And the most terrifying part is how normal he makes it seem. In the barracks, the twins talk among themselves, comparing stories in hushed voices. One describes injections that left them feverish for days. Another shows scars from surgery that still ooze pus. Some cry quietly in the dark, clutching their siblings, knowing that as long as they're together, they're still useful. The moment one of them dies, the other's days are numbered. It's a bond twisted into a curse. Occasionally you hear footsteps in the night. Guards enter, call out a pair of names, and 2 children are led away. They don't come back. Rumours spread. Autopsies, skeletons, specimens preserved in jars. Nobody knows for sure, but everyone understands the truth. Mengele's toys are discarded when they're broken. And yet, he smiles the next morning, strolling through the barracks as though nothing happened. He asks questions, compliments hair colour, offers candy. Some of the children smile back, too young or too desperate to see through the facade. Others turn their faces away, knowing that kindness here is just the bait on a trap. You lie awake at night, your twin beside you, the fear gnawing at your stomach. You wonder when your turn will come. Will it be injections tomorrow? A surgery? A sudden selection in the night? You don't dare ask. You don't dare plan. You just cling to your sibling's hand and pray that somehow both of you will wake up again tomorrow. Because here, in Mengele's world, twins aren't miracles of biology. They're experiments waiting to happen. Toys for a man who thinks God handed him the keys to creation, when in reality he's nothing more than a butcher with a stethoscope. You've made it this far, somehow. Frozen, blistered, starved, stitched, burned, maybe even cut open, and yet you're still alive. But in a place like this, being alive only means you're eligible for the next test. And this time, survival isn't about cold, or salt, or radiation. This time, survival means letting your body become a battlefield for the deadliest diseases known to man. Welcome to the world of infectious disease experiments. Typhus, malaria, plague, where the syringe isn't filled with medicine, but with something designed to break you from the inside out. The Nazis had a problem, or at least they said they did. Their armies spread across Europe were constantly battling disease. Soldiers on the front lines weren't just dying from bullets and bombs, but from fevers, parasites, bacteria. Typhus swept through trenches. Malaria stalked warm regions. Plague lingered like a ghost of medieval times. They wanted vaccines, cures, ways to protect their troops. And rather than risk German volunteers, they looked to the prisoners in striped uniforms. If you want to test a vaccine, you first need someone sick, so their logic was simple. Why wait for a natural outbreak when you can inject people directly? You're marched into a room that feels more like a laboratory than a torture chamber at first. Bright lights, stainless steel trays, glass vials filled with clear and cloudy liquids. The smell of alcohol swabs and disinfectant hits your nose. A cruel disguise that makes it seem like you're about to get treated rather than destroyed. You sit on a wooden bench alongside others, your sleeve rolled up whether you want it to be or not. A doctor approaches with a syringe, needle gleaming. The prick is small, barely noticeable, just a sting. But inside that syringe is something that will take over your entire body in hours. Maybe it's typhus, a bacterial infection that thrives in filth and lice. Maybe it's malaria, carried by mosquitoes, now delivered straight into your bloodstream. Maybe it's plague, the same disease that once wiped out half of Europe. You don't know which it is. The doctor doesn't tell you. He doesn't need to. At first, you feel nothing. You're marched back to the barracks, told to rest, though rest is impossible with the dread gnawing at you. Then the fever starts. It creeps slowly, a warmth spreading under your skin, until suddenly your body is an inferno. Sweat drenches your thin clothes, your hair plastered to your forehead, every breath ragged. Your heart pounds like it's trying to escape your chest. If it's typhus, the fever is relentless. Waves of heat that leave you delirious, shaking with chills 1 minute and burning the next. Your skin erupts in a rash, angry red blotches crawling across your arms and torso. Your head pounds with a pressure so intense it feels like your skull might split. You babble nonsense, not even sure where you are anymore. And the doctors? They lean in close, listen to your ramblings, take notes on how long it takes before your mind fractures under the fever. If it's malaria, the fever comes in cycles. Hours of chills so violent your teeth chatter, followed by sweats that soak the straw beneath you. Then, just when you think it's easing, the fever crashes back with double the force. You vomit until your stomach is empty, then retch until there's nothing left. Your body convulses with shivers. Your muscles ache as though you've run miles you never walked. The doctors count the hours between each cycle, chart the temperature of your body, and argue about whether one strain is more effective than another. If it's plague, the terror multiplies. Buboes, swollen, painful lumps, form under your arms and in your groin, throbbing with every heartbeat. They grow until your skin stretches tight, dark, threatening to burst. Your blood thickens with infection, your lips turn black, your breath stinks of rot. You lie there, half conscious, knowing you're carrying the same disease that once stacked corpses in medieval streets. Only this time, your suffering isn't fate, it's deliberate. Someone put this inside you on purpose, just to watch what happens. And sometimes it isn't just the disease. Sometimes it's a vaccine. Maybe you're injected first with an experimental serum, then infected to see if it works. If it fails, and it usually does, you suffer just as much, maybe more, because now your body is juggling both the disease and the chemicals meant to fight it. The fever spikes higher. The rashes spread faster. The pain doubles. The doctors shrug, scribble ineffective, and move on. Days blur together in a haze of sickness. You can't eat. You can barely drink. Every muscle screams. Every joint aches. Your body twists and writhes on the straw, soaked in sweat, reeking of infection. The sound of moaning fills the barracks as others go through the same torment, each at a different stage of collapse. Guards walk through, unfazed by the smell of vomit, urine, blood, the stench of disease. They don't worry about catching it themselves. They believe they're safe because the suffering is contained to you. The doctors return daily, checking pulses, peering into bloodshot eyes, listening to your chest with stethoscopes. They don't offer comfort, they don't bring water, they only observe. Some of them seem bored, even annoyed when a subject dies too quickly. Others are almost pleased when the disease lingers, stretching your agony out for weeks. Longevity means more data. Your misery is more useful when it doesn't end right away. Sometimes they treat you, but treatment is just another experiment. A dose of quinine for malaria to see if it shortens the fever. A shot of some untested serum for typhus to see if it does anything at all. A crude attempt at antibiotics, too weak or too late to matter. They don't treat you to heal you. They treat you to see what happens. And if you die, they shrug. One more result in a chart. One more number in a ledger. In the barracks, whispers grow quieter. Nobody wants to talk too loudly when the air itself feels contaminated. You hear coughs, groans, the scrape of a body being dragged away in the night. Sometimes you wake to find the bunk beside you empty, its occupant gone to the crematorium. Sometimes you wake to see someone still lying there, eyes glassy, body still, the fever having burned them out. The cruelty of this experiment isn't just that you're sick. It's that you know exactly why. You weren't unlucky. You weren't in the wrong place at the wrong time. You were chosen, injected, infected, all by design. And the very thing that should represent healing, the syringe, the doctor's hand, has become the weapon that put you here. The irony is unbearable. Medicine is supposed to stop disease, to save lives, to fight back against nature's cruelty. But here, medicine is the delivery system for plague. Science is the excuse for your suffering. Doctors, the people who swore to heal, are the ones who made you sick. And when your fever burns so high that you can't tell whether you're awake or dreaming, you realise the darkest truth of all. You weren't unlucky to catch a disease. You were unlucky to catch their attention. And tomorrow, when your body finally gives out, when the fever cooks your brain, when your breathing rattles to a stop, they'll cut you open. Autopsies are part of the study. They'll slice into your chest, your abdomen, your swollen lymph nodes, studying the effects from the inside out. Your last breath won't end your role as a subject. You'll be studied even in death. Another specimen in a laboratory that was never meant to heal. By now you've probably figured out that in this place, your body isn't really yours. It's a collection of parts, like someone dumped a bag of spare pieces on a table and decided to see what happens when they get bent, cut, and stitched back in the wrong order. If it hasn't been your skin blistering from gas, or your lungs collapsing under disease, then it's your bones, muscles, and nerves next in line for science. And by science, I mean the kind of experiments that sound less like medicine and more like a sadistic hobby someone dreamed up after reading an anatomy book upside down. The setup doesn't look that different from the other labs you've been marched into before. White walls, trays of instruments, doctors in coats pretending they're in some prestigious university clinic. But what stands out this time are the tools themselves. Not just scalpels and syringes, but hammers, saws, clamps, drills. It looks less like a hospital and more like a mechanic's shop. Only instead of fixing cars, they're breaking people. You look at the metal on the table and realise with a sick twist in your stomach that it's not meant for machines. It's meant for you. The process begins simply, almost clinical. The doctor selects a limb, your leg, your arm, and applies pressure. Then suddenly there's a snap, deliberate and sharp. They've broken your bone on purpose with no accident, no hesitation. The pain is blinding, immediate, flooding every nerve in your body. You cry out, but the sound barely matters in this room. To them, your scream is just another measurement, a sign that the procedure worked. They jot down the time, the reaction, the way your body convulses. Sometimes they break bones and leave them. They want to see how they heal untreated, whether the body can manage on its own when left to knit itself back together. Other times they intervene, but not in ways that make sense. They don't set the bone properly. They don't cast it. Instead, they force it into awkward angles, screw metal plates into it, stitch muscles back incorrectly. They might even remove sections of bone altogether, leaving gaps, then try grafting in pieces from another victim. Imagine being broken and then rebuilt wrong on purpose. Your body turned into a grotesque puzzle with pieces jammed into the wrong slots. The infections come quickly. With no real sterilization, wounds fill with pus, stitches ooze, flesh blackens. The fever that follows is almost worse than the break itself. You lie there sweating, trembling, your body shaking as bacteria eat away at tissue already mangled by knives and saws. But to the doctors, the infection isn't a complication. It's part of the study. They take notes on how long it takes before the swelling reaches your knee, how the pus smells, whether gangrene sets in. Your agony is their data. Muscles are no safer. They cut them open, slice them lengthwise, then stitch them back poorly, deliberately leaving the fibres unable to contract the way they should. You try to flex your arm afterward, and it hangs useless, spasming weakly, like the wires inside have been snipped. Sometimes they remove entire chunks of muscle, leaving cavities under your skin that will never refill. They do it again and again, comparing one limb to another, one prisoner to another, writing down which cut cripples movement fastest, which removal makes walking impossible, which mistake leads to death quickest. And then there are the nerve experiments. If bones and muscles are the framework of your body, nerves are the wires that make it all work. So the doctors slice into them, severing lines like they're unplugging cables from a wall. They want to see what happens when certain nerves are cut. Does the hand stop moving? Does the leg go numb? Does the pain spread elsewhere? Sometimes they try to stitch the nerves back together, crudely, like a child tying two frayed ropes. The result is never clean. The nerves don't reconnect properly. Sensation comes back in twisted ways. Phantom pains searing in places you didn't even know could hurt. Other times they go further, experimenting with transplants. Cutting nerves from one body, trying to graft them into another, forcing tissues to fuse where they don't belong. The results are always failure, infection, necrosis, paralysis, but that doesn't stop them. Each failed experiment is just another excuse to try again on the next prisoner. The physical suffering is indescribable. Every movement becomes torture. Broken bones grind against each other with sickening crunches. Muscles stitched wrong tear open with the slightest strain. Severed nerves leave half your body burning, while the other half feels nothing at all. Walking becomes impossible. Even sitting is agony. You're reduced to a heap of broken parts on a straw mattress. Your body no longer responding to you, but to the whims of men with notebooks. And yet, the cruelty doesn't end with the procedures themselves. There's the constant humiliation of being reduced to a specimen. They talk about you while you're lying there, not to you. They argue over your body as though you're not present. The swelling here is interesting. The graft didn't take. The subject no longer responds to stimuli. Subject. That's all you are. Not a person. Not even a prisoner. Just an experiment. A broken machine they're testing until it finally stops running. You hear the stories in the barracks too. Someone had their leg broken in 3 places and left to rot until amputation was necessary. Another had muscles removed from their thigh until they could no longer walk, crawling back into the barracks like an animal. Someone else had nerves severed in their arm, leaving them unable to lift even a spoon. Every survivor carries a scar, a limp, a disfigurement that screams the truth of what happened. And many don't survive at all. Their bodies collapse under infection, under blood loss, under pain too overwhelming to endure. But the most haunting part is that these experiments weren't about discovering cures or helping humanity. They were about war. The Nazis wanted to know how long soldiers could function with broken bones, torn muscles, severed nerves. Could they still fight? Could they still march? Could they be patched together quickly enough to return to battle? You, lying there with bones shattered and muscles sliced, weren't part of a medical study. You were a stand-in for a soldier on the battlefield, a human crash test dummy for the Reich. When you close your eyes at night, You don't dream anymore. You relive the hammer striking bone, the knife cutting deep, the electric shock of nerves being severed. The pain doesn't leave, even in sleep. It sits in your body like a second skeleton, a reminder that every part of you is subject to their curiosity. And as you listen to the shuffle of footsteps outside, the clang of keys, the bark of guards, you know it's only a matter of time before they decide they need more data, and your body becomes their workshop once again. At this point, your body feels like it's been through every possible version of breaking, cutting, burning, and poisoning. But just when you think they've exhausted every creative way to torture people under the label of medicine, the doctors find a new frontier to poke at. Because if they could cut into bones, muscles, and nerves, why not take it one step further? Why not try moving entire pieces of you from one place to another? Why not treat you like a puzzle, where the pieces can be ripped off and glued back in a different spot? That's when you enter the nightmare of transplant experiments. The logic wasn't complicated, at least to them. On the battlefield, soldiers lost arms and legs all the time, limbs shattered by shrapnel, blasted off by grenades, crushed under tanks. The Nazi doctors wanted to know, could a soldier's body part be replaced like a spare part in a machine? Could you cut off a limb, stick on another, and somehow make it work again? To answer that, they didn't use volunteer soldiers. They used you, prisoners, who had no choice but to lie still while someone else's idea of science turned your body into a grotesque workshop. The room you're dragged into looks like a cross between a morgue and a butcher's shop. Cold metal tables, buckets of water, tools laid out that don't belong anywhere near human flesh, bone saws, clamps, surgical knives dulled from overuse, and in the corner, wrapped in cloth or soaking in preservative, are the parts, limbs taken from other prisoners who didn't survive their own round of experiments. The smell is sharp, metallic, nauseating. You realise quickly that what you're about to endure has nothing to do with saving lives. It's about seeing just how far they can push the limits of mutilation. The first step is removal. They choose a limb, your arm, your leg, and they take it from you. Sometimes they do it with crude surgery, cutting, sawing, tearing you open while you're half conscious. No anaesthesia strong enough to drown out the agony. Other times, they simply amputate brutally, hacking through muscle and bone with more speed than precision. The pain is beyond screaming, beyond crying. It's the kind of pain that takes your breath away entirely, leaving only a silent gasp as your vision swims. Blood pours, flesh shreds, and the doctor nods calmly, as though everything is going according to plan. Then comes the transplant itself. They lift another limb, sometimes freshly cut from another prisoner, lying lifeless in the next room, sometimes taken from a cadaver that's already begun to stiffen. They press it against your stump, trying to fuse it with crude stitching and metal pins. Muscles are sewn to muscles, tendons to tendons, bones drilled and clamped together. None of it lines up properly. The limb hangs at the wrong angle, pale and foreign against your skin, a mismatched puzzle piece forced into place. The doctors step back, pleased with themselves, and wait to see what happens. Do the blood vessels connect? Do the muscles respond? Does the limb come alive? The answer is almost always no. Infection spreads quickly. The new flesh blackens, swelling, oozing pus. The stitches tear open. The transplanted limb becomes a dead weight, a rotting piece of meat dangling from your body. The fever sets in soon after, your whole system revolting against the invasion. Your heart pounds, your body shakes, sweat pours, and all the while the doctors keep watching, scribbling notes, fascinated by the way you fall apart. And this isn't just done once. Sometimes it's repeated, swapping limbs from one prisoner to another, an arm from one body sewn onto another, a leg stitched clumsily where it doesn't belong. Men and women turned into grotesque patchworks, stitched together like test dummies in an experiment that never had any chance of success. Some were even subjected to internal organ transplants, kidneys, livers, cut out of one body and stuffed into another, the victim bleeding out on the table while the doctors nodded thoughtfully at the failure. The cruelty isn't just in the pain, though there's more than enough of that. It's in the sheer absurdity. You know as it's happening that none of this is going to work. Medicine at the time didn't have the tools, the understanding, the techniques to make a transplant successful. There were no anti-rejection drugs, no sterile conditions, no precision sutures. It was doomed from the start. And yet they still did it, over and over, turning living people into Frankenstein creations just to satisfy their curiosity. You hear the stories afterwards, whispered in the barracks. Someone saw a man return with another person's arm sewn crudely to his body, dangling uselessly, smelling of rot. Another described a woman whose leg had been cut off and replaced with one shorter, leaving her limping until infection consumed her entirely. Survivors don't really survive these experiments. They exist for a few days, maybe weeks, their bodies broken beyond repair, their minds shattered by the horror of looking down and seeing a piece of someone else stitched where their own used to be. The humiliation is a weight on top of the pain. You're not just suffering, you're transformed into something grotesque, unrecognizable even to yourself. You look down at your own body and don't see you anymore. You see stitches, scars, mismatched flesh, someone else's hand sewn where yours should be. You can't eat with it. You can't hold with it. It doesn't feel like yours because it isn't. And that theft, the theft of identity, of wholeness, is almost worse than the mutilation itself. The doctors, of course, don't see it that way. They talk casually about their grafts, their transplants, their subjects. They debate whether a particular stitching technique worked better, whether one type of clamp held bone together longer. They call failure progress. They call suffering data. They never admit that what they're doing is pointless, because admitting that would mean admitting that everything here is cruelty dressed up in the language of science. At night, lying in your bunk, your body stitched, swollen, burning with fever, you can't help but wonder about the other half of you. Where did your limb go? Whose hand is it now attached to? Is someone else lying in another barracks, looking down at a part of you sewn onto their body? The thought is maddening. The camp has taken everything else from you. Your freedom, your dignity, your health, and now it's taken your very flesh, scattering it like scraps across other people, as if you were never whole to begin with. And when the fever finally becomes too much, when the transplanted limb rots beyond saving, when gangrene creeps up your body, the doctors don't mourn the loss. They make their notes, shake their heads at the failure, and move on to the next subject. Another table, another saw, another prisoner forced into becoming a patchwork experiment. Because here, your body isn't just yours. It's spare parts for someone else's experiment. A collection of meat and bone to be swapped, tested and discarded. And once your usefulness ends, once the experiment collapses into infection and death, they'll cut you open one last time, not to save you, but to dissect you, to catalogue the wreckage they created with their own hands. You thought meals here were already the cruelest joke imaginable. A crust of stale bread, a watery broth that tastes like dirt, sometimes a sliver of mouldy potato floating in the mess. Enough to keep you alive, but not enough to give you strength. Food in the camp isn't meant to nourish. It's meant to string you along, to keep you just barely on your feet for the next roll call, the next shift, the next experiment. But even in that grim routine, at least the food itself wasn't the thing that was killing you. Until now. Because in this next nightmare, dinner comes with a side of poison. The Nazis loved efficiency. They wanted fast, clean methods of killing. Ways to test new poisons that could be slipped into enemy food or water without fuss. They wanted to know which substances killed quickest, which caused the most pain, which left no trace. And of course, they weren't about to test these things on themselves. That's where you come in. You're not just a prisoner anymore. You're a taste tester in the most horrific sense of the word. It starts like any other mealtime. You're marched into the mess hall, given a tin bowl, maybe a piece of bread, maybe a slice of sausage if it's one of the rare, generous days. You sit with the others, the smell of boiled cabbage or watery stew filling the air. But there's something different about the food this time. You don't know it yet, but it's been laced with a chemical, a powder, a drop of something clear and deadly. At first you can't tell. The food tastes as bland as ever. Maybe a little bitter, maybe a little off. But hunger overrides suspicion. You shovel it in quickly because that's what you always do. And then you wait. It doesn't take long. A burning sensation crawls down your throat, spreading through your stomach. Cramping, sharp and sudden, twists your insides like someone's wringing out your guts by hand. Sweat beads on your forehead. Your vision blurs. Your hands shake. You clutch your stomach, hunching over the bowl, trying to keep the contents inside. But your body revolts. You vomit violently, bile and blood spilling onto the floor. Your body convulsing as if it's trying to expel the poison that's already wormed its way into your bloodstream. For some poisons, it's fast. Cyanide, for example, works within minutes. Your throat seizes, your lungs struggle. Every breath feels like drowning without water. Your lips turn blue, your heart pounds erratically, and then collapses. Death comes suddenly, like a switch being flipped. One moment you're retching, the next you're still. Other poisons drag it out. Ricin, arsenic, mustard compounds. These carve through your system slowly, hour after hour of unrelenting agony. Stomach cramps, diarrhea, endless vomiting, dehydration so severe your tongue swells in your mouth. Blood leaks from places it shouldn't. Your gums, your nose, sometimes even your eyes. You lie on the floor, body shaking, screaming hoarsely until your voice gives out. Death doesn't come quickly. It stalks you, lingering, stretching the suffering until you're nothing but a shell writhing in filth. And of course, not everyone dies immediately. That's part of the point. Some prisoners are given antidotes afterward, not to save them, but to test whether the cure works. Doctors rush in with syringes after you've collapsed, injecting chemicals to counteract the poison. If you survive, they call it progress. If you don't, they shrug and move on, Either way, your suffering has been measured, timed, written down neatly in German script. The cruelest twist is how ordinary it all looks from the outside. A group of prisoners eating, guards watching silently, doctors scribbling notes in the corner. To an outsider, it might almost look like mealtime, routine, boring. But in reality, you're watching men and women collapse into seizures, foam at the mouth, clutch their throats, their faces contorted in agony as poisons tear them apart from within. The sound of retching fills the air. The smell of vomit and blood mixes with the stench of cabbage stew. And through it all, the guards remain stone-faced, as though this is just another shift in their day. In some cases, poison isn't hidden in food at all. Sometimes it's delivered directly. A small pill pressed into your hand, a liquid forced between your lips, a powder blown into your face. You choke, you gag, you resist, but it's useless. The substance is already inside you, and as you collapse onto the floor, convulsing, the men in coats stand above you, checking their watches, counting how long it takes before your body stops moving. And it's not just adults. Children are given poison candy, sweets laced with chemicals, treats that feel like kindness until the convulsions begin. The cruelty is almost theatrical, offering something comforting, only to turn it into a weapon. You can imagine the satisfaction on their faces as the sugar turns sour in the mouths of children who never stood a chance. The barracks afterward are filled with whispers, rumours, half-truths. Someone swears they saw a man collapse after eating bread. Another says the soup was poisoned. Another mutters that the water itself can't be trusted. Suddenly, every bite of food is suspicious. Every sip of water feels like a gamble. Hunger gnaws at your stomach. Thirst dries your throat. But fear stops you from reaching for the bowl. Because here, even the act of eating, the one thing meant to keep you alive, has been turned into another experiment in death. The most grotesque part of all of this is that it was never about discovering cures or creating real medicines. It was about weapons. Poisons that could be slipped into enemy supplies. Toxins that could wipe out entire units silently. Chemicals that could kill without a shot being fired. And to test them, they needed you, your body, your suffering, your death, all reduced to a footnote in a report filed away in some folder marked confidential. And when the meal is over, when the bodies are dragged away, the bowls collected, the floor scrubbed of vomit and blood, the mess hall looks ordinary again, as if nothing happened, as if dinner wasn't just a mass execution in disguise. Tomorrow the routine will repeat. Another pot of stew, another round of bread, another group of prisoners told to eat and wait. And the cycle continues, because here, even food, the most basic, essential act of life, has been twisted into a weapon wielded by men who treat death as just another experiment. By now, you know that when they say experiment, it usually means they've found yet another way to see how much damage a human body can take before it gives out. They've starved you, frozen you, infected you, sewn you, swapped your pieces around, and poisoned you through your dinner. But sometimes, cruelty doesn't need to be disguised as subtle science. Sometimes it's as simple and as horrifying as fire. That's where the phosphorus burns come in. Phosphorus was a favourite in warfare. Soldiers on the front lines feared it because once it touched you, it didn't stop. White phosphorus sticks to skin, clings like molten glue, and burns hotter than almost anything you can imagine. Water doesn't put it out. Smothering doesn't put it out. It just keeps eating through flesh until there's nothing left but bone. So of course, the doctors wanted to know, what exactly does it do to a person? How deep? How fast? How deadly? And could wounds like that ever be treated? That's where you find yourself. Stripped down again, laid on a cold table under the glare of lamps, while a man in a coat holds a vial of liquid fire. He doesn't explain, doesn't warn you. He doesn't need to. The guards hold you down while the phosphorus is applied directly to your skin. Maybe your arm, maybe your chest, maybe across your face. And then the pain hits. There's nothing gradual about it. No slow build. The second phosphorus touches you, it ignites, and your body becomes its fuel. It's not just heat. It's not just fire. It's something deeper. A searing pain that drills into nerves and makes every cell in your body scream at once. You thrash, you kick, you try to pull away, but the guards press you harder into the table. You can smell it immediately. Burning flesh, acrid and choking, filling the room with the unmistakable stench of cooked skin. The burn doesn't stop on the surface. It tunnels inward, layer by layer, until it reaches muscle. If it's on your arm, you can actually watch your flesh blister, split, char, curling back to reveal the bright red tissue beneath. If it's on your torso, the pain radiates into your chest. You're breathing shallow because even moving air hurts. If it's on your face, the fire blinds you, melts your eyelids, sears your mouth. And through it all, the doctor calmly takes notes, observing how quickly the burn spreads, how much tissue is destroyed in minutes. Sometimes they don't stop with one burn. They apply phosphorus in patches, marking you like a canvas. A burn here, a burn there, each one studied as though you were nothing more than a piece of meat thrown on a grill. They want to see how burns heal when left untreated, how long it takes for infection to set in, how the body fights, or fails to fight, damage this severe. And if they decide to treat you, it's not for your sake. They smear crude ointments on the wound, scrape away charred flesh, or pour chemicals directly onto the raw burn, not to heal, but to test which method works fastest. The pain doubles, triples, as they prod the wound, ripping away dead skin that clings stubbornly to your body. You scream until your throat is raw, but the sound only blends into the background noise of this place. The cruelty of phosphorus is that it doesn't stop even when you think it's gone. Tiny fragments stick to your skin, glowing faintly, reigniting when exposed to air. Hours later the wound flares again, sparks of pain ripping through you like lightning strikes. You wrap the area, you press it, but nothing works. The fire finds oxygen and keeps eating, as though it has a will of its own. You lie awake in your bunk at night, staring at the ceiling, afraid to move, afraid to breathe too deeply in case it fans the fire under your skin. In the barracks, you hear whispers of others who've been through it. People with arms wrapped in filthy bandages that still smoke faintly. Faces scarred beyond recognition. Half melted by fire that never should have touched them. The smell follows them everywhere. Burnt flesh mixed with infection. A constant reminder of what phosphorus does. Some of them don't last long. The burns get infected, sepsis spreads, fevers consume them. Others linger, scarred and broken, their bodies permanently disfigured by experiments that were never meant to save anyone. The doctors, of course, call it progress. They argue about which ointment slowed the burning more effectively. They compare charts of patients who survived 3 days versus 5. They note whether wounds on the chest kill faster than wounds on the arm, whether burns near arteries cause quicker blood loss. To them, every blister, every scream, every scar is just another entry in their ledger of suffering. And the worst part is how deliberate it all is. This isn't a battlefield accident. This isn't a soldier caught in crossfire. This is fire applied carefully, intentionally, in a sterile room by men who smile politely and wear clean coats. They choose where to place the flame. They choose how long to let it burn. They choose whether you live another day, or whether the phosphorus devours you completely. And you're forced to endure it, helpless. Your body turned into nothing more than an answer to their question. How does fire eat? Later, when you're lying back in the barracks, wrapped in filthy rags, your body shaking with fever, the smell of your own burnt skin seeping into your nose, you realise something chilling. You're not afraid of fire the way you used to be. Fire used to mean warmth, cooking, light. Now it means only pain, destruction, endless scars. And every time you close your eyes, you feel it again. The sizzle, the crackle, the unbearable heat crawling down into your very bones. And tomorrow, when the guards come stomping down the row, barking orders, pointing fingers, you know it could be you again, dragged back under the lamps, your body painted with phosphorus like a canvas for destruction. Because here, even fire itself has been twisted into a tool, not for war, not for defence, but for the simple, calculated cruelty of watching a human being burn. You would think that after being burned, poisoned, infected, stitched wrong, and maybe even set on fire, the list of ways they can torture you would have finally reached its limit. But the Nazis had a way of finding new methods to push bodies past breaking. At Dachau, they brought science and suffering together in water. Not just any water, freezing tanks designed to study hypothermia. They wanted to know how long the human body could survive in icy conditions, how it failed, and what might revive it. And you? You're the test subject, floating in the cold, while men in coats jot down numbers on clipboards, waiting to see if you'll drown before the data dries on the page. It starts with the march. You're led out of the barracks, past rows of prisoners staring blankly, until you reach a building with a tank inside. The smell hits first. Chlorine mixed with the sharp chill of standing water. The room is sterile, too clean, too clinical, which somehow makes it worse. Because at least filth is honest. This place looks like a laboratory, like real science is about to happen. Until you notice the guards smirking, the ropes hanging nearby, the restraints fixed to the edge of the tank. The order comes and you strip. Thin clothes fall away, leaving your body exposed to the cold air. Goosebumps rise immediately, your teeth already chattering before you've even touched the water. The guards shove you forward, and the shock comes all at once. The icy water clamps around your body like a vice, every nerve screaming. It's not just cold, it's an assault. A pain so total it feels like being stabbed by 1,000 tiny blades. You gasp involuntarily, sucking in air so sharply you almost choke. Instinct says, get out, thrash to the surface, escape. But you can't. Ropes tether you in, and hands push you down if you try to climb. The cold sinks in fast. First your skin burns, the sharp sting of water colder than anything you've ever felt. Then it turns numb, your flesh losing sensation as blood vessels clamp shut. Your body shakes violently, muscles spasming, teeth clattering so hard you're sure they'll break. Your breath comes in ragged bursts, each inhale shorter than the last as your chest tightens. The doctors hover nearby with notebooks and stopwatches. They call out numbers, note the time when the shivering starts, when it peaks, when your movement's slow. They watch your lips turn blue, your skin pale, your eyes glaze. To them, you're a clock winding down, and every second is worth recording. After a while, time stops making sense. Minutes stretch into eternity. You can't tell if you've been in the tank for 10 minutes or 10 hours. Your body feels far away, like you're watching yourself drift. Muscles stiffen, fingers claw into useless shapes, legs heavy as stone. The violent shivers begin to fade, replaced by a deep, terrifying stillness. That's when you realise you're slipping into hypothermia. The cold isn't just around you anymore, it's inside you, swallowing everything. Sometimes they pull you out before you drown. Sometimes they don't. When they do, it's not mercy. It's the next phase of the test. They drag your limp body onto the floor, water pouring from your mouth, skin a mottled blue-grey. Then they try to rewarm you, but again, not for your sake, for theirs. The methods vary. Sometimes they wrap you in blankets and wait, checking your pulse as if patience alone will do the trick. Other times they shove you into scalding baths, plunging your frozen skin into water so hot it feels like fire. You scream weakly, your body lurching between extremes, frozen one moment, boiling the next. And then there's the cruelest method: animal warmth. They strip other prisoners, force them to lie naked against your icy body, skin pressed to skin, their warmth meant to revive you. It's humiliation on top of agony, human beings turned into tools, bodies used like heaters. Not everyone comes back. Many slip under the surface and never rise again. Others make it out of the tank only to die hours later, their bodies unable to cope with the damage done. And those who survive carry the scars invisibly, the memory of lungs filling with water, of numbness so deep it felt like death itself, of doctors staring blankly while they begged to be pulled out. The worst part is how ordinary the process seems to the men running it. They don't shout. They don't laugh. They don't even look angry. They just observe. Stopwatch in one hand, clipboard in the other, eyes fixed on you like you're a specimen in a jar. Your suffering isn't personal to them. It's clinical, which somehow makes it even more horrifying. Because this isn't cruelty for cruelty's sake. It's cruelty disguised as data collection, the slow drowning of human beings excused by the word science. At night in the barracks, you can always tell who's been in the tanks. Their skin is blotchy, their movement stiff, their eyes distant like they've already seen the other side. They cough constantly, lungs rattling with water they couldn't expel. Some whisper about the strange warmth that comes at the end. The moment when freezing stops hurting, when you feel calm, almost comfortable, right before the end. They say it feels like sleep, but it's not sleep. It's the body shutting down, giving in, accepting the cold as master. And the doctors keep coming back, tank after tank, subject after subject. Notes piling up while lives vanish. They're not really searching for a cure. They're not trying to save future soldiers. They're just watching death at different temperatures, recording how long it takes before the body surrenders, before the shivering stops, before the drowning is complete. And if you happen to be one of the unlucky ones dragged back to the tank again tomorrow, they'll start the stopwatch fresh, as if nothing you endured yesterday even counted. Because here at Dachau, water isn't about life. It isn't about cleansing, or drinking, or even drowning. It's about numbers. And every time you're shoved into the icy depths, gasping for breath while your heart slows, you realise the truth. You're not floating in water. You're sinking in data. By now, you've been cut, burned, poisoned, frozen, and stitched into something you barely recognise. You'd think there isn't much left they can do to surprise you. But the doctors always have another idea waiting, another so-called study, where your body is nothing more than raw material. This time, the subject is blood. Specifically, how to stop it when it won't stop on its own. The Nazis had a problem to solve. War is messy. Soldiers bleed out on the battlefield long before anyone can drag them to a medic. Bullets tear through arteries. Shrapnel opens jagged wounds. Explosions rip people apart. And their scientists, always eager to tinker with life and death, wondered if there was some magical way to plug those wounds instantly, to force blood to clot faster, to keep soldiers alive long enough to fight again. Their solution? Secret powders, chemical concoctions, even things as absurd as sawdust. And who better to test them on than the prisoners already crammed into their camps? The process begins the way so many others do. Violence disguised as procedure. You're strapped down on a table, the smell of disinfectant stinging your nose, even though the instruments on the tray are anything but sterile. The doctor doesn't ask permission. He doesn't explain. He simply cuts, a deliberate slice across your arm, your leg, maybe something deeper, designed to gush, not trickle. Blood spills instantly, pooling on the table, dripping to the floor. The pain is sharp, but familiar by now. What unfamiliar is what comes next. Instead of bandages or stitches, they sprinkle something into the wound. Sometimes it's a powder, granular, grey, gritty, smelling faintly chemical. Sometimes it's thicker, like paste, smeared directly onto the open flesh. Other times, they pack the wound with something crude, even wood shavings or sawdust, pressing it in with gloved hands while your body jerks in agony. The theory is simple. If you clog the wound with something, anything, it might stop the bleeding. The reality is far from simple. At first, the bleeding slows. The powder reacts with the blood, forming a crusty seal. The doctor nods, satisfied, and makes a note. But within minutes, the wound begins to burn. It's not just pain. It's chemical fire chewing into the tissue. The area swells, turns red, throbs with each heartbeat. Infection sets in quickly, because none of this is sterile. The sawdust carries dirt, bacteria, splinters. The chemical powders eat away at healthy flesh, leaving raw craters that ooze pus. And when the experiment doesn't work, when the bleeding doesn't stop, or when the pain becomes unbearable, the doctors don't intervene to save you. They watch. They time how long it takes before the wound clots naturally, how much blood you lose, whether you faint, whether you die. They mark down the moment when your pulse weakens, when your breathing slows, when your eyes roll back. To them, your collapse is just another entry on a chart. Sometimes they make it worse on purpose. A small cut isn't enough. They create larger wounds, deep gashes across thighs, punctures in arms, sometimes even simulated shrapnel injuries created with metal fragments. Each new wound becomes a testing ground for a different powder, a different formula. They pack the holes with mixtures that sting, burn, fester. They want variety. They want results. and every drop of your blood spilled is another number in their pursuit of answers. In some cases, they don't even bother with living bodies. They open wounds on prisoners already dying from other experiments, testing whether their secret formulas can force coagulation in people already half gone. And when the body finally gives up, when the heart stops pumping, the doctors still cut deeper, applying their concoctions to flesh that no longer bleeds, just to see how it reacts. The survivors, if you can call them that, carry wounds that never heal properly. Scars twisted and thick. Infections that linger for weeks. Limbs left useless from nerve and muscle damage. The powders might stop blood for a moment, but they destroy everything else around the wound. You're left with flesh that looks burned, skin that tears open with the slightest pressure, tissue that rots long after the doctor has moved on. And what makes it worse is the absurdity of it. Sawdust packed into human wounds? It sounds insane because it is insane. It is. But in their twisted pursuit of battlefield solutions, the Nazis were willing to try anything, no matter how degrading, no matter how cruel. And in their hands, even something as simple as wood shavings became a weapon, turning human bodies into grotesque experiments where suffering was the only guarantee. Lying in your bunk afterward, your arm or leg wrapped in filthy rags, the wound throbbing with every beat of your heart, you hear others whispering about their own ordeals. One man says they shoved sand into his wound. Another swears they poured boiling chemicals into a gash on his chest. Another describes being cut open repeatedly in the same place just to test a new powder. The barracks are filled with groans, fevers, the stink of infection, each body carrying the evidence of experiments that were never about saving lives. And yet, the doctors keep going. Because to them, you're not dying from a wound. You're producing data. Your blood loss is a number. Your infection is a side note. Your death is a failed formula, nothing more. And when they open their notebooks and record it all neatly, they believe they're serving science, even though what they're really serving is cruelty dressed up as research. So you lie there, weak, dizzy, your body drained of blood and strength, knowing that tomorrow they might cut you open again, sprinkle another powder into the wound, pack it with something new. And you can't help but think, your veins, your blood, your very life are nothing more than ingredients in their recipe, mixed and measured until the experiment is finished. Or until you are. You thought you'd seen every possible way they could use a body. Cut, burned, stitched, frozen, poisoned. But there's another layer, one colder than all the rest. Because sometimes the doctors and professors running these experiments weren't satisfied with testing what the living body could endure. They wanted trophies. They wanted collections. They wanted to turn living people into dead specimens, polished and catalogued like objects in a museum. That's what happens when you hear whispers about the so-called skeleton project. It doesn't sound real at first. Skeletons? You've seen bones before, scattered from bodies buried shallow, the grim leftovers of experiments that ended badly. But this isn't about death as a side effect. This is death as a design. Certain scientists decided they wanted a full collection of Jewish skeletons to study. Not just random bones, not dusty skeletons from graveyards. They wanted freshly prepared skeletons from people chosen while alive, killed for the sole purpose of stripping their flesh away to display their bones. A grotesque classroom project dressed up as anthropology. Imagine it. You're in the barracks, already weak, already starving, when a guard points you out. You don't know why. Maybe because of your features, your build, the shape of your face. You don't realise it yet, but you've just been selected. Not for work, not even for experiments meant to test survival, but because someone has decided your skull will look nice hanging on a hook in their anatomy collection. You're led away, separated from the others, into a world that feels different from the usual brutality. This isn't the chaotic cruelty of freezing tanks or poison trials. This is calculated, organised. Someone out there had the patience to plan an entire project around turning people into skeletons. You're measured, photographed, catalogued like a specimen while you're still breathing. They want to preserve what you look like before they strip it all away. Notes are taken on your eye colour, hair, body type, even the shape of your nose. You're reduced to data, a line in someone's book, another entry in a twisted shopping list of bones. Then comes the final step. You're killed, not for immediate results, not for testing medicine, but purely so your body can be processed. The methods vary. Sometimes gas, sometimes injection, sometimes shooting. It almost doesn't matter. What matters is that once you're gone, you're not given a grave, not returned to the earth, not mourned. You're sent to a dissection room where workers scrape flesh from your bones, boil what's left, bleach it, prepare it like some kind of specimen for an anatomy lab. The smell is unbearable. Burnt hair, cooked flesh, chemicals biting into the air. And yet, to the men in charge, it's routine. Just another batch of skeletons to add to the collection. In the end, what remains of you is displayed in a neat row. A skeleton stripped clean, bones polished white, tagged with a number. Your skull sits on a shelf beside dozens of others, each one once attached to a living, breathing person who had memories, fears, families. Now they're silent, reduced to objects. Student and professors stroll past, pointing at skull shapes, jawlines, bone structures, as if they're looking at rocks in a geology exhibit instead of people butchered for science. The horror isn't only in the killing, it's in the intention. This wasn't accidental, it wasn't improvised. Someone thought about this, planned it, budgeted for it. Someone decided that the best way to study anatomy was to exterminate real people and turn them into display cases. And the Nazi machine provided the victims, rounding up Jewish men and women not just to kill them, but to repurpose their very skeletons as teaching tools. For the people chosen, the terror wasn't just in dying, it was in knowing what came next. To realise that your body wouldn't be laid to rest, that your remains would be stripped and cleaned, stored in drawers, hung in classrooms, poked at by curious fingers, that you wouldn't even have the dignity of decay, you'd be frozen forever as an artifact of cruelty. In the barracks, whispers of the project spread, though no one really wants to believe it. It's too grotesque, too absurd, to imagine that the guards and doctors would go to such lengths, but eventually survivors confirm it. They talk about crates shipped out of camps, bones packed carefully, skulls labelled and sent away like fragile items. They talk about entire shipments destined for universities, where professors would nod approvingly over the specimens without ever acknowledging that each one came from a stolen life. You try to sleep after hearing that, but your mind won't rest. You can endure cold, pain, hunger, but the thought that you could be reduced to a skeleton in someone else's classroom lingers like a nightmare you can't shake. You imagine your own skull lined up neatly next to dozens of others, your jaw hanging slightly open, your empty eye sockets staring out at nothing while strangers scribble notes about the slope of your forehead. And you wonder, when they look at you, will they remember that you were a person? Or will you just be another number etched onto bone? The sheer arrogance of it is crushing. To them, your people aren't human. You're a collection, a sample, a resource to be harvested like coal or timber. They talk about skulls and skeletons with the same detachment you might use to talk about chairs or books. And with that detachment comes the final erasure, not just of your life, but of your identity. You're not even a body anymore. You're an object in a cabinet, and somewhere, while you lie awake, shaking, waiting to see if you'll be chosen next, you can hear laughter echoing faintly from the laboratory where bones are being cleaned. Because to the men in charge, this isn't horror. It's work. It's achievement. It's one more step in their grotesque mission to catalogue people not as humans, but as things. And that realization is more chilling than anything else. That your body, your bones, your very skeleton might outlive you not as a memory, but as a trophy. You've survived long enough to see what happened after the tests end, after the guards drag the dead away, after the screaming fades from the rooms where the experiments take place. What's left isn't silence. Not really. What's left is paperwork. Stacks and stacks of it. Reports, notes, data sheets, charts. The afterlife of every cut, every burn, every injection, every drowning. It's all there, carefully recorded by men who never once saw you as human. This is what makes the horror feel almost worse. Because while your memories of the experiments are chaos, screaming, blood, fever, ice water, fire, they remember it differently. They remember numbers, they remember times, dosages, reactions. They write it down neatly in notebooks, each page a record of human suffering reduced to sterile observations. And those notebooks pile up, locked in cabinets, filed away in archives, as though the agony of thousands could be contained in ink on a page. Imagine lying on your bunk, your body wrapped in filthy rags, infection burning through your veins, while in another room a doctor sits at a desk, calmly sipping coffee while he organises the day's results. He doesn't see faces when he writes. He doesn't hear the screams anymore. He just records, subject expired after 27 minutes. Temperature at collapse, 28 degrees Celsius. Poison ingestion led to convulsions at T-4 minutes. You are a number, a data point, a line in a study that pretends to be science. The absurdity is crushing. They destroyed lives for this, and yet the results aren't even reliable. Half the time, the experiments are sloppy, uncontrolled, riddled with bias. Prisoners are malnourished, sick, terrified. Conditions are inconsistent, outcomes skewed. Any real scientist would look at the results and throw them out. But here, in this nightmare, the data is treasured like gold. Not because it's useful, but because it exists. Because it makes the cruelty look official, stamped with the seal of science. And when the war ends, those piles of data don't just disappear. Some of it is burned, destroyed in the panic of retreat. But much of it is found, neatly bound, waiting for someone else to read it. Doctors at Nuremberg look through the reports and shake their heads at the sheer scope of it. Pages describing children injected with typhus. Charts of body temperatures as prisoners froze to death. Notes about wounds packed with sawdust. Entire folders dedicated to twins dissected for comparison. Some of the data is ignored, too tainted by the crimes that produced it. but some isn't. Some gets quietly passed along, tucked into military files, whispered about in medical conferences. Because no matter how grotesque the source, there are always people willing to see if they can extract something useful from suffering. Maybe it's a detail about hypothermia that might help pilots. Maybe it's a note on chemical burns that might be relevant to future wars. And in that moment, the cruelty echoes forward, because the victims remain trapped in the very notes that killed them. For you, it's unbearable to imagine that everything you've endured, every second of pain, every shiver, every scream, could end up as nothing more than handwriting on a page. That your body could be reduced to a statistic, your suffering turned into an entry in someone's report. That the men who cut you open, who froze you, who burned you, could sit back afterward and think they had created knowledge instead of carnage. And yet, that's exactly what happens. Long after the experiments themselves stop, the data lingers. The charts, the graphs, the tables. Cold, lifeless, stripped of context. They don't say you were terrified. They don't say you begged to be spared. They don't say you were a person with a name and a history. They just say you died after 27 minutes. They just say you convulsed at T-4. They just say you burned, froze, bled, collapsed, all neatly written, as if the writing could erase the reality of what happened. Even now, when you think about it, you can't shake the image of those piles of paper. You can see them stacked on desks, spilling from drawers stored in cabinets. An ocean of ink documenting a sea of pain. And it makes you realise something worse than all the suffering itself. That in the end, the doctors didn't care about you at all. They cared about the numbers. They cared about the data. They cared about building their little mountain of knowledge, even if it was built from corpses. And in that way, death doesn't end anything here. It just becomes another line in a notebook. Your body is gone, but your agony lives on in a pile of data, stripped of everything that made you human. And that's the cruelest fate of all. Not just to die, but to be remembered only as an entry in a study that never should have existed. When the war finally ends, the camps are liberated, the guards scatter, and the world sees what was hidden behind the barbed wire, you'd think the story would stop there. You'd think the people responsible for the freezing tanks, the poisons, the fire, the bone-breaking surgeries would vanish into shame or face swift justice. But instead, their next stage isn't a laboratory or a barracks, it's a courtroom, the Nuremberg doctor's trial. That's what it's called later. Rows of men in uniforms and suits sit behind desks. The same hands that once held scalpels now folded politely in front of them. They look less like monsters and more like bureaucrats, middle-aged academics who could have been professors in another life. And in a way they were professors of pain. But now they're defendants, accused of crimes so vast it's hard even for the prosecutors to put words around them. You imagine what it must feel like, sitting in that courtroom as survivor testimony is read aloud. Prisoners describing hypothermia tanks, poison-laced food, phosphorus burns, amputations without anaesthetic, twins dissected for comparison. Each story longer, more detailed, more horrifying than the last. The judges sit stiffly. The translators repeat the words in different languages. The defendants look down, or sometimes straight ahead, their expressions unreadable. Some deny everything. Some say they were following orders. Some even claim their experiments had scientific merit. That's what twists the knife. After everything, After the screams and the bodies, and the piles of notebooks filled with data written in cold German script, some of these men still insist it was science. They talk about research. They talk about medical necessity. They hide behind words like procedure and experiment, as though those words could erase the images of people drowning in tanks or writhing in chemical burns. To hear them speak, you'd think they were innovators, not butchers. But the survivors' voices cut through. You hear them describing what it felt like to be submerged in freezing water, to feel their bodies shake uncontrollably, to lose consciousness while doctors timed their decline. You hear women describing sterilization surgeries that left them broken, men describing amputations that left them crippled. You hear the pain in their voices, the pauses when memory becomes too heavy to carry, and you realise that no matter how polite the courtroom looks, this is still a battlefield. Truth fighting against denial, memory against erasure. The prosecutors bring forward the evidence, documents, charts, records pulled from the ruins of labs, tables listing how many minutes it took for prisoners to die in hypothermia experiments, detailed notes about poison ingestion, reports on children killed for skeleton collections. The defendants can't deny the handwriting. They can't deny the signatures. They can only argue, weakly, that it was all necessary. Necessary for science. Necessary for the Reich. Necessary for war. As if necessity could ever excuse turning human beings into experiments. And then comes the judgment. Not all of them are condemned. Some escape with prison sentences. Some walk away altogether, slipping into new lives, some even continuing medical careers. Others are sentenced to death, executed for their crimes. On paper, it looks like justice. The doctor's trial becomes a milestone, remembered as one of the moments when the world finally drew a line and said, never again. But when you look closer, you start to wonder if it was enough. Because for every doctor hanged, another found a way out. For every man convicted, another claimed he was just following orders and walked free. And worse, some of the knowledge they gathered, the data from the very experiments that killed you and countless others, didn't vanish with the verdicts. It lingered. Buried in archives, sometimes whispered about in medical research, sometimes quietly referenced, which makes you realise the trial wasn't the end. It was a beginning too. A beginning of questions about whether knowledge gained through cruelty can ever be clean, whether using that data dishonours the dead or honours their suffering. For you, as someone who lived through it, the courtroom is surreal. To hear men who once stood over your body in a lab coat now stand behind a microphone and insist they did nothing wrong, that they were serving science, that they were patriots. It makes your blood boil, even if you're too weak to show it. They speak in calm voices, trying to sound reasonable, while you carry the scars they left behind. You wonder if the judges can see past the civility, if they can picture what really happened in the camps. The water, the fire, the sawdust stuffed into wounds, the skeletons hung in classrooms. And maybe they do. Maybe that's why some of the sentences are harsh, why some of the men swing at the end of a rope. But even as the verdicts are read, even as the world celebrates the idea of justice, you know the truth. Nothing can balance the scales. No execution, no prison sentence, no judgment can undo what was done. The best the trial can do is leave a record, a scar in history that says, this happened. And in a way, that's what it really is. Not so much justice as paperwork. A tidy set of files and transcripts, a historical marker that future generations can point to and say, we knew and we judged. But for you, the survivor sitting in the back of that courtroom, paperwork doesn't stop the nightmares. It doesn't erase the memories of freezing water or burning skin. It doesn't bring back the family members turned into skeletons or the children poisoned with candy. Justice on paper feels thin when your body still carries the damage, when your mind still replays the screams of the barracks. And as you watch the defendants led away, some to death, some to prison, some to freedom, you realise the trial isn't really for you. It's for the record, for history, for the idea that the world can tell itself it did something about the horrors it saw. And yet, even that thin, fragile justice is more than nothing. Because without it, the men in white coats might have walked away completely, their notebooks tucked under their arms, their careers intact. At least here, their names are dragged into the open. At least here, their deeds are spoken aloud. At least here, the world is forced to listen. But still, as the trial drags on, as verdicts are read, as reporters scribble their stories, you can't help but feel it. Justice or just paperwork? Guys, if you've made it this far, you're probably lying in bed. Maybe your room's a little too warm. Maybe the blanket is bunched up under your legs. Maybe you're listening with your phone on the nightstand while your eyelids get heavy. You might be fidgeting, scrolling one last time before you drift off. Or maybe you're already half asleep. Your breathing's slowing down. And you don't think about it much, but everything around you is designed for comfort. Your mattress has springs or memory foam. Your pillow cradles your head just the way you like it. There's clean water in the kitchen, food in the fridge, maybe a nightlight humming softly in the corner. All the little things you never question. That's the world you get to fall asleep in. Now imagine the contrast. Imagine trying to sleep on a wooden plank. No mattress, no pillow, no blanket. Just rough wood pressing against your bones. You're not warm. You're freezing, because the barracks don't have heating. Your body shakes even under layers of rags. You're not clean. You haven't had a real bath in weeks, maybe months. Your skin itches with lice. The stench of unwashed bodies and infection fills your nose every time you try to take a breath. Around you, men and women groan in their sleep, some coughing blood, some too weak to move. That's not a nightmare you wake up from. That's where you're supposed to fall asleep every single night. Think about water. You drink from the tap without a second thought. It's clear, filtered, safe. Maybe it's even cold from the fridge. But in the camps, water could be poison, salt-soaked, contaminated, a tool of experimentation. Prisoners drank seawater until their organs shut down. They swallowed filthy rations that made them vomit. Every sip was a risk. And when their bodies swelled from dehydration, when their tongues cracked from thirst, there was no clean tap waiting for them. There was only more cruelty disguised as research. Or fire. For you, fire is a candle flickering on your desk, a cosy fireplace, maybe a barbecue grill on the weekend. Harmless, warm, pleasant. But for the prisoners dragged into the Phosphorus burn rooms, fire was alive, relentless, eating flesh until only bone remained. Imagine lying awake after that, skin blistered, nerves raw, the smell of your own body cooked into the air. That's what they tried to rest with while you're turning over in your bed, fluffing your pillow because it doesn't feel soft enough. Even silence means something different. For you, silence at night is peaceful. No voices, no noise. Just the steady hum of the house settling. But in the barracks, silence was heavy with dread, because silence meant no one dared to move. Silence meant waiting for boots on the floorboards, for guards to yank someone out for another round of tests. You tried not to breathe too loudly. You tried not to cough. You learned to sleep half awake, always listening, always ready for the door to slam open. And what about medicine? You keep aspirin in the cabinet, maybe cough syrup, maybe something stronger prescribed by a doctor who actually wants to help you. But in the camps, medicine was another weapon. Injections weren't cures. They were diseases pumped straight into your veins. Doctors didn't ask how you felt. They made you sick on purpose, just to see if you'd survive. Every needle meant terror. Every bandage was another excuse to tear a wound open. Imagine lying in bed now, staring at the ceiling, wondering if the next injection will be malaria, or typhus, or poison. That's the sleep they tried to find. The more you think about it, the more you realise how much distance there is between your world and theirs. You complain when the air conditioner hums too loudly, but they froze to death in tanks of ice water. You complain when the Wi-Fi lags, but they were cut open without anaesthetic just to test if muscles could be sewn back together. You complain when your blanket slips off in the middle of the night, but they slept with rats crawling over their bodies. You have comfort, convenience, safety. They had experiments, cruelty, death. But here's the thing, you can't unnotice now. You've walked through the barracks in your mind. You've felt the freezing tanks, the poison searing your gut, the fire crawling across your skin. You've heard the way the doctors talked about data while ignoring screams. And as you lie in your warm bed, adjusting your pillow one last time, you know that your comfort exists in a world that once created those nightmares. The two are linked, past and present, even if they feel like different universes. So when you drift off tonight, you might feel a little different about the way your blanket covers you. You might notice the way clean sheets feel against your skin. You might listen to the silence in your room and realise it's not heavy, not full of dread, it's peaceful. You might sip water in the morning and actually taste how safe it is. And maybe, just maybe, you'll remember that once, not so long ago, people tried to fall asleep without any of that, surrounded by pain so deep it never really ended. And you'll keep listening, because that's the least you can do.